Hey, thanks for being here, everyone. I tried to do a video a couple seconds ago and it was lagging. So let me know if it's lagging or not. If you guys can keep up with me. Uh, One second. Anyways, yeah, so the big news that just hit as I was coming on, again, if someone could tell me if I'm lagging or not, what's up, Dave? Is that the Justice Department has decided to drop the case against Flynn, which is good news. But let's read it together. It's just coming across the AP from 5 minutes ago. So this has been a long time coming. I encourage you to go back. I was one of the first people I saw doing this, but I actually went through the 302s that were supposedly written by Peter Strzok. For those of you who don't know, despite the fact that we all have one of these, a cell phone that's basically capable of recording whatever we want, for some reason the FBI doesn't record their interviews. I would predict that's because then they're able to lie on their transmissions of their own interpretation of what was said and get people to be found guilty whenever they feel like it. But whatever the reason, they don't audio or video record. Instead, they just take notes. When you looked at the original notes from the 302s about Flynn, even in those notes, it proved that Flynn didn't lie. He said, I don't recall, but that could have happened regarding his conversation with Kislyak about sanctions. That's not a lie. If saying I don't recall, it could have happened is a lie, then basically everyone who's testified in front of Congress in the past 10 years of things that we've seen on television that say I don't remember, I can't recall, should be criminally prosecuted. We had all sorts of crazy things going on. For example, at one time, there were two people that interviewed Flynn, Joe Patenka and Peter Strzok. Supposedly the prosecution got their two 302s mixed up. We then found out that Flynn's defense team, Covington, actually withheld information that was beneficial to Flynn's defense. The prosecution also withheld that material. That's called Brady material. The prosecution is mandated to hand over material that could be beneficial to the defense. They decided not to. We had the court issuing all sorts of crazy judgments saying that the Flynn prosecution needed to go through. We had allegations that the only reason Flynn pled guilty was because they threatened to charge his son, which ended up being true, with unrelated crimes. All of these shenanigans going on. Just this week, we found out things such as we now know that Rod Rosenstein used the Steele dossier that was already discredited in his memo and the scope of what Robert Mueller's investigation should be for. He also wanted the investigation to be about the Logan Act, which is absurd. The Logan Act's a law from the 1800s that's never been used to prosecute anyone. It means that you can't go as a non-representative of the executive branch and talk to foreign leaders and adversaries. John Kerry does that all the time, but he's never charged with it. And he's going to Iran trying to disrupt what's going on with President Trump and his negotiations with Iran. But supposedly the incoming president wasn't allowed to have his incoming team talk to their counterparts in other countries. That's absurd. So we've seen this kind of corruption that was going on from the get-go, and now it's finally came to the head. Only when they're finally forced are they now saying, oh, okay, I guess we'll drop the charges. So let's go right to the AP article. Let's see what it says. You'll be reading it with me. I just saw that it came over Twitter, and I figured, oh, what the heck? Might as well start on it. Let me make sure this is showing up for everyone. The Justice Department on Thursday said it's dropping the criminal case against President Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn, abandoning a prosecution that became a rallying cry for Trump and supporters attacking the FBI. The move is a stunning reversal for one of the signature cases brought by special counsel Robert Mueller. It comes even though prosecutors for the last 3 years had maintained that Flynn had lied to the FBI about his conversations with the Russian ambassador in the January 2017 interview. Flynn himself admitted as much and became a key cooperator for Mueller as he investigated ties between Russia and the 2016 Trump campaign. First off, let's remember Flynn was under duress and admitted to avoid the prosecution of his son. I find it very hilarious that the same bleeding heart left-wing people that will say, oh, the police are racist, they're locking black people up at record clips, or did you see this Netflix documentary where they coerced a guilty plea out of someone, but that poor innocent child or teenager actually didn't do it. He was coerced into pleading that. It's funny that all of a sudden that changes when you're talking about someone like Flynn. Oh, no, he couldn't have been coerced. If he pled guilty, he must be guilty. Even though we know that originally FBI agents such as Patenka and even Strzok came out of the interview saying, no, we don't think he lied. We then see, despite that text messages from Strzok, once everything fell through and it turned out that Flynn didn't lie, begging to leave the investigation open because he wanted to go after Flynn, which is exactly what happened. In court documents being filed Thursday, the Justice Department said it's dropping the case after a considered review of all the facts and circumstances of this case, including newly discovered and disclosed information. The documents were obtained by the Associated Press. The Justice Department said it concluded that Flynn's interview by the FBI was untethered to and unjustified by FBI counterintelligence investigation into Mr. Flynn. Let me read this again. The Justice Department said it had concluded that Flynn's interview by the FBI was untethered to and unjustified by the FBI's counterintelligence investigation. So they're saying this had nothing to do. Flynn's interview by the FBI was untethered to, so it wasn't attached to the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Mr. Flynn. That's a lie. If that's what the DOJ is talking about, of course it had to do with their counterintelligence investigation into Flynn. That's what it was all about. And it wasn't justified by the counterintelligence. And that the interview on January 24, 2017 was, quote, conducted without any legitimate investigative bias. That's garbage. Here we go. So, yeah, good news that Flynn's getting off the hook. But already you could see the DOJ setting the chips for, oh, no, we didn't do anything wrong. With all the evidence we see, changing 302s, saying that Flynn didn't lie, and then changing their mind and saying that he did lie, accusing him of absurd things like the Logan Act, having Peter Strzok begging to keep the investigation open, having the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, sit on this material so that it couldn't get out in the public, having the prosecution sit on the material so that the defense couldn't reasonably use it, having the own defense team of Michael Flynn go counter to his interest and get him to cooperate against Donald Trump. And they're saying, oh, but it didn't have any bias. Why is it that we know even the IG admitted, Peter Strzok had bias, but every time he takes a seemingly unprecedented action that goes against FBI policy and borders on illegal, it's always, oh, but there was no bias. We assure you there was no bias. Whatever, let's keep reading. Oh my goodness, wait a minute, I just flipped out for no reason. It doesn't say bias, it says basis. The January interview was conducted without any legitimate investigative base. This is why you should read articles before you do a video. Yeah, okay. So then I guess, reading this, it's saying they had no reason to question Flynn the way they did. There was no legitimate investigative basis. Yes, that's true. That's obvious from the evidence. So I take back what I said about the bias. Certainly the case was conducted with bias. I'll get to more of that later. The U.S. attorney reviewing the Flynn case, Jeff Jensen, recommended the move to Attorney General William Barr last week, formalized the recommendation and document this week. Through the course of my review of the Flynn case, I concluded the proper and just course was to dismiss the case, Jensen said. I briefed Attorney General Barr my findings, advised him on these conclusions, and he agreed. The decision is certain to be embraced by Trump, who's relentlessly tweeted about the case, and last week pronounced Flynn exonerated, and energized supporters who have taken up the retired Army Lieutenant General as something of a cause célèbre. But it may also add to Democratic concerns that Attorney General Barr is excessively loyal to the president and could be a distraction for Justice Department that for months has sought to focus on crimes arising from the coronavirus. The Justice Department's actions come amid an internal review on the handling of the case and an aggressive effort by Flynn's lawyers to challenge the basis for the prosecution. The lawyers cited newly disclosed FBI emails and notes last week to allege that Flynn was entrapped into lying when agents interviewed him at the White House days after Trump's inauguration. Though none of the documents appeared to undercut the central allegation that Flynn had lied to the FBI, Trump was last week pronounced him exonerated. The decision is the latest dramatic turn in a years-old case full of twists and turns. In recent months, his attorneys have leveled a series of allegations about the FBI's actions and asked to withdraw Flynn his guilty plea. A judge has rejected most of the claims and not ruled on others, including the bid to revoke the plea. The decision comes as Barr has increasingly challenged the Russia investigation, saying in a television interview last month that it was started without any basis. That's true. We know that's the case. We can see, for example, with the Mueller investigation, the reason it started, Rod Rosenstein, even though we were told, no, this isn't true, Rosenstein used as the scope of that a bunch of evidence from the Steele dossier. We now know the Steele dossier was Russian disinformation. Once more, the special prosecutor that was appointed by Rod Rosenstein, the acting head of the FBI at the time, investigated Trump and his team based on Kremlin disinformation that was paid for by Hillary Clinton. So yes, there was no basis for it. Earlier this year, he appointed Jensen of St. Louis to investigate the handling of Flynn's case. As part of the process, the Justice Department produced to Flynn's attorneys a series of emails and notes, including one handwritten note from a senior FBI official that mapped out internal deliberations about the purpose of the Flynn interview. What's our goal? Truth, admission, or to get him to lie so we can prosecute or get him fired, the official wrote. Again, and this was the smoking gun. They already had, it's hard to wrap your head around this, but they weren't looking for evidence of a crime. They actually had the transcript. If there was a crime, they would have charged him. There was no crime in that transcript. So for some reason, they wanted to get him fired or locked up. Why? They don't say. So they decide, we already have the document, and now we're going to try to catch him in a lie, which they didn't, according to their 302s, but they alleged anyways and threatened his son in order to get him to plead guilty. Now, the reason that they wanted Flynn out of there was because Flynn was critical of policies of Obama, such as the Iran deal. So this was political motivation seeking to have retribution and remove someone that was an obstacle to Obama's legacy. Other documents show that the FBI had been prepared weeks before its interview of Flynn to drop its investigation into whether he was acting at the direction of Russia. Later that month, though, the White House insisted that Flynn had never discussed sanctions and Russia Ambassador Kislyak. FBI officials grew alarmed by Flynn's conversations with the diplomat and would have been communicated to the White House. The investigation remained open, and agents went to visit with him. Justice Department officials visited the White House 2 days later to warn officials that they feared Flynn was compromised and vulnerable to blackmail by Russia because of the account of what was said on the call. White House officials waited several weeks to oust him from the job, saying that they concluded that Flynn had lied to them. Flynn pleaded, and remember, Comey admitted on camera to a bunch of people laughing, I couldn't have got away with this in a normal administration. Yeah, we didn't tell him why we were there. We sent the agents to just go talk to him as friends and recommended to him that he not have a lawyer there. He provided Flynn pleaded guilty, becoming the first of the president's aide to admit guilt in the Mueller investigation. That's what this was all about. They, one, wanted him to turn on Trump, and second, they wanted scalps. I said this from the get-go. They had to justify their investigation. They knew that eventually, if it came out, first thing they wanted to do was find some sort of evidence of some crime that Trump committed. I don't know if they didn't find that or what, but they didn't use it, even if they did. So the next thing they wanted to do, because they couldn't find that, was to find dirt and to get people to plead guilty or get people charged with any crimes whatsoever. Because they knew if they didn't oust Trump, eventually it would come out that the investigation was started based on sham reasons. Remember, Devin Nunes said, look, the FISA warrant on Carter Page, it relied on the Steele dossier. And Adam Schiff, who read the same document, said, no, it didn't. We promise you it didn't. He had the access to the exact same documents as Nunes. Yet he came to a 180-degree opinion on it. Nunes says it was used extensively. Schiff says, no, that's not the case. It turns out Nunes was right. Schiff was wrong. Yet Schiff hasn't been punished for that. But anyways, what I was saying at the time was, what this will be about is, if they get some sort of conviction, it will allow them at the end of the day to say, look, even if it was started under shaky grounds, the fact that we got people and found them guilty proves that we were right to launch this investigation. So that's what was important. Get Flynn to plead guilty no matter what. Get Cohen to plead guilty no matter what. Get Papadopoulos to plead guilty no matter what. Go after those 12 Russian trolls no matter what. Because the FBI needed something to hang their hat on to say, see, it was all worth it. The Russia investigation was worth it. Well, it wasn't. And one by one, all of these fall apart. We see that the accusations of Carter Page have fallen apart. We see that the Flynn accusation has fallen apart. We saw that the accusation against the 12 Russian trolls has fallen apart. What are we left with? George Papadopoulos misremembered a conversation that he had while drunk to an Australian diplomat that's connected to the Clintons. And Michael Cohen misremembered some dates on when they discussed Trump Tower in Russia. That's what we're left with the convictions. Oh, and Manafort committed crimes by lobbying for the Ukraine to Hillary Clinton with Hillary Clinton's campaign manager's firm, the Podesta Group. That's the big three crimes. That's what we got him on. Continuing, he provided extensive cooperation with prosecutors, said he was entitled to a sentence of probation instead of prison. As it turned out, that sentencing hearing was abruptly cut short after Flynn, facing a stern rebuke from U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan, asked to be able to continue cooperating and earn credit towards a more lenient sentence. Flynn's misgivings about the case were already on display when his then attorneys pointedly noted in their sentencing memo that the FBI had not warned him it was against the law to lie when they interviewed him in 2017. Since then, though, he's hired new attorneys, including Sidney Powell, a conservative commentator and outspoken critic of Mueller's investigation, who have taken a far more confrontational stance to the government. The lawyers have accused prosecutors of withholding documents, they did, and evidence they said were favorable to the case, and repeatedly noted that one of the two agents who interviewed Flynn was fired from the FBI for having sent derogatory text messages about Trump during the campaign. So there we go. So let's talk about what this means. Is this a victory? Yes, it's a victory. It'll be spun by the Democrats. They'll say, see, Barr and the Department of Justice, it's corrupt. That it's never, see, we couldn't question the Department of Justice when it was Eric Holder. We couldn't question it when it was Loretta Lynch. That was attacking enforcement, law enforcement type agencies, and it was harming the country. Now, Trump's Department of Justice, of course we could attack. Lynch was actually meeting with the target of her investigation's husband in secret on a tarmac and refused to recuse herself from that investigation. She pretended to recuse herself, but was secretly then talking to James Comey saying, hey, don't call it an investigation. She's trying to steer what it was publicly. People at the FBI admitted in text messages that they knew whatever the hell they recommended when it came to charging Hillary or anyone connected to her, there was no way that the Department of Justice under Loretta Lynch would actually go through with the prosecution. That's admitted by FBI agents. Never talked about, though. But hey, we can go after Bill Barr. And so, again, this is part of what it's going to be about. They shaped the narrative. They got their scalp. They got someone, a corrupt person, Mueller, whether he or his team that was corrupt. Maybe Mueller was just an infirmed old man like Joe Biden and didn't know what was going on. But they got them to admit or say, hey, there was corruption. Someone pled guilty. And then that's it. Oh, everything's justified. So now they could say, we pled guilty, and now he's saying he wasn't. This proves that Barr's corrupt. That's absurd. The evidence speaks for itself. Now, we'll get to how people are willing to convince themselves to lie about evidence of corruption in a bit here with the Twitter exchange I was having. But yeah, it's a good day for Michael Flynn. His name's been dragged through the mud. He was kept out of a position that apparently he thought that he would be good for and was actively the national security advisor, seemed to be interested in having. Why is it that Strzok, that had such animus towards Trump, went through with these type of things? Why was he quoting that he wanted to get him fired? Why was he saying that he begged for the investigation to be left open after they thought that Flynn didn't lie? Why were the 302s changed and the judge and the prosecution got it mixed up? Who was Patenka's and who was, Peter Strzok's? Why did the prosecution withhold evidence to Flynn? If he was obviously guilty, then why withhold exculpatory evidence? None of those questions have been answered. And so let me say this. Is this a victory for Flynn and for those of us that are tired of these corrupt prosecutions? Yes. Will the left and the media, and will they be all rampant today? Oh my God, Trump's abusing his power. Bill Barr's abusing his power. Of course, that's what they're going to do the whole time. Even after the IG that was appointed by the Democrats and recommended by the Democrats, Horowitz, showed the abuses of the FBI, still the media and the Democrats said, oh no, this exonerates the FBI. Manufacturing evidence to say the opposite of what it actually said, to spy on people connected to Trump's team. And they said, yeah, that exonerates the FBI. That's what they said. So of course that's what they'll do now. But let me caution people. One of the things that we do as people that are patriots, that are tired of the establishment and all the corruption we see, one of the things that we repeatedly do is celebrate these small victories like they're victories bigger than what they actually are. And while it's very important that Flynn be exonerated, and he is, what's equally, if not more important, is for the corrupt people that set the stage for that corrupt prosecution to be held accountable for their actions. And until I see that, I won't be satisfied. You can tell I flew off the handle because I misread the word basis for bias earlier, so that's not good. But that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for these criminals to finally be held to account. Now we know that once more, we're always told, though, it's just incompetence. Every single time. Every time we could see that the FBI did everything they could to totally let Hillary and everyone connected to her off the hook, and then did the exact opposite with everyone connected to Trump, to the point of not handing over exculpatory evidence, manufacturing evidence to say the opposite of what it was, lying to FISA courts, saying that you talked to a subsource that told the truth, but withholding the fact that what they told the truth about was that their entire case was garbage. Every single time. They're destroying evidence on behalf of Hillary's team. They're raiding houses in the middle of the night looking for evidence against Trump. They're charging people with failing to register as a foreign lobbyist connected to Trump, his campaign manager, but Hillary's campaign manager's firm, the Podesta Group, who was working directly with Paul Manafort, they let off the hook. Every single time we see this, quid pro quo with Joe Biden's okay, quid pro quo with Trump's not. Until we start to see those that are engaged in this corrupt process be held accountable, the corruption will continue unabated. And the only victories we'll ever have is, well, hey, some guy got his life ruined for 2 years, but at the end of the day, he was exonerated. Yay. Yes, that's a victory for Flynn, and I'm sure he's excited. I feel great for him and his family. But these stories will repeat ad nauseum. The coup will repeat, or the sedition, or whatever you want to call it, will repeat ad nauseum until the coup plotters are actually held accountable. That's right, Anon. It took less than 6 months after the Watergate break-in for the system to arrest, try, convict, and for Gigi Gordon Liddy to enter prison for a 20-year sentence. Barr can't get one arrest. Absolutely right. Absolutely. So we'll see what happens. But I would have liked, granted, I can understand if the statement saying we're dropping the charges against Flynn doesn't come at the exact same time as and we're now going to prosecute the people that corruptly went after him. So I'm not saying, because it wasn't in the same, press release that's horrible. But I'm skeptical that we'll ever see that press release, that the corrupt will ever be investigated. Now, so that's where we're at with Flynn. The corruption, though, that we see, Flynn's just one angle. We saw the corruption with the FISA scandal with Carter Page, right? Who were their targets? You had Carter Page, you had Papadopoulos, you had Flynn, you had Manafort. So far with Manafort, we know for a fact that many of the crimes he was accused of was actually committed with the Democrats, with the Podesta Group. They actually worked in tandem. The Democrat was allowed to get off retroactively signing paperwork. Flynn goes to solitary confinement. They raid his house, all of that. Roger Stone was accused of lying to Congress. We know for a fact that Comey, Brennan, Clapper all lied to Congress. All of them. I've proven it on this video over and over again. We celebrate because Roger Stone went from being recommended 7 years to 2 years. Has Comey or Brennan, Clapper, any of them been charged? No. Now we have Flynn that's let off. The 12 Russian trolls, they were let off because there wasn't evidence to go after them. Every single case that we were told that justified the Mueller investigation ends up being garbage. Now we know that Rosenstein lied. He used discredited Kremlin disinformation, the Kremlin-sourced disinfo that was from the Hillary Clinton team paid for Steele dossier. They used that Kremlin-sourced disinfo to launch a special counsel against Trump, to have FISA applications against Trump's team to be able to spy on him and his team. That's what occurred. The corruption is undeniable, and yet time after time after time, the narrative, because the Republicans are so feckless, the narrative is controlled by the establishment, particularly the face of it, which is the Democratic Party, and they're allowed to shape in the minds of millions of people that don't follow this as much as me and you, that this wasn't a big deal. Just look at the impeachment sham. That was the major story every day. The average person had no clue. Do you know what they're really going after Trump for? Do you think that we should investigate if, say, a high-branching executive official threatened to withhold $1 billion of your tax dollars to a country unless they fired a prosecutor looking at his son's company? Do you think that warrants an investigation? 99% of Americans would say, yeah. Okay, that's why they're impeaching Trump, because he wanted that investigated. But the feckless Republicans couldn't get that message out there. It's the same here. And so we have to swallow this blatant corruption, and the Democrats and the FBI and the media, they say, no, it's not corruption. It's just incompetence. Just simple mistakes. Mistakes that were made. That's all. Isn't that convenient? The mistakes are really starting to add up. Why did they allow Podesta to retroactively sign paperwork but not Manafort? Just a lapse in judgment. Why did they give everyone immunity and smashed their devices in the Hillary case before trying to get them to flip to see if they could get bigger crimes? They went against Protocol 1. Why did they go against the Woods procedures where they had to re-verify information on FISA warrants hundreds of times in the Carter Page investigation? Just a whoopsie. Why did they change evidence to say the opposite of what it actually said in order to justify spying on Trump's team? Just a mistake. Why did they withhold to the FISA court that the actual subsource that Christopher Steele totally relied on for all of his salacious claims admitted that it was all garbage and they thought he was truthful? Just a mistake. Why did they withhold evidence, Brady material in the Flynn case? Just a mistake. Why didn't they go after Stephen Halper, who, according to Mueller and the FBI and all of them, was the actual first Russian agent and Russian spy that set forth the motion of Carter Page, who was their first investigative asset? Just a mistake. Every single time, just a mistake. Just a mistake. Every time. At what point do we even care? If the FBI is that incompetent, if these investigative agents are that incompetent that they don't know things like, hey, you're not supposed to change evidence to the opposite of what it actually says. If they're that incompetent that the top brass handpicked 3 separate teams of 4 to 6 people and none of them knew you weren't supposed to manufacture evidence to say the opposite of the truth, then we're in a lot of trouble. That's almost worse than the corruption. But I'm here to tell you, they control the narrative so well that people that I consider reasonably intelligent people fall for it hook, line, and sinker. So I'm debating whether or not to show you the actual Twitter feed. Now, this is a little self-aggrandizing on my part because it's a Twitter feud. And feud's not the right word, but a Twitter discussion between me and a friend that I've had on the show before. And normally I'm not one to bring up things that we've had on Twitter as, areas of discussion, really. But I thought this one was worth, what's going on here? Was worth discussing because I think it really shows how someone I otherwise consider intelligent, just how insane. Now, admit it, I'll start from the top here and I'll just read the tweets to you. And there's a lot. It's a huge chain, so I'll be judicious. I'm not going to read every single one. It started with me criticizing Ben Shapiro on Twitter. Of course, Shapiro's not going to respond to me. But my criticism was this. Shapiro says, there's no changing that from the outside. All choices suck, referring to COVID. So we should stop pretending considering all of these choices are somehow an indicator of evil motivation. And this brought to mind, to me, Shapiro's interview with Joe Rogan, where they're discussing the Russia situation. And all of this evidence at the time is coming that the FBI is possibly engaged in corruption. We already saw the IG report on their investigation into Hillary with unprecedented actions left and right to let Hillary off the hook. Then we saw that it was unprecedented actions in the total opposite way every single time to try to get Trump and people connected to him to be guilty of any crimes. So I just said to Ben Shapiro, that's always your line, isn't it? Like when you stated there was no nefarious actions behind the FBI's by the FBI against Trump's team and said it was all incompetence. How many times do you have to be proven wrong before you can push that? Now, I rightfully get called out that that's not exactly fair. That's possibly true. But the way I should have phrased it is this. That mentality, that axiom that, never blame with corruption what could be explained by incompetence. One of the problems with that axiom is then you never accuse actual corruption of corruption. Now, I too try to give best possible motivations to people, but how many times do we have to be lied to by the FBI? How many times do we have to see them have a total double standard every single time that's be as easy as possible with Democrats or people connected to the establishment, go as hard as possible with Trump? It's the same with the media. Every mistake they make tends to be unfavorable towards Trump. Why is that always the case? There's never big errors in the media. Every time there's a retraction, it's always, they had a story that painted Trump like crap, and then it turned out that story wasn't true. It never goes the other way. So at some point we have to say, can we stop claiming that it's incompetence every time and say that there's some bias involved here? So we proceed to, it's lagging here. We proceed. He said, I think, the person I'm discussing says, he said, when you're in doubt, it's better to assume incompetence. And I say, yes, but in the evidence of the Russia case, there was evidence of overwhelming corruption. Person says, I don't think there was evidence of overwhelming corruption. We proceed to go from there, okay? I think I'm doing this justice without reading every So far, a reasonable discussion. I said, explain to me a more plausible explanation than corruption than the FBI changing an email to say the opposite of what it said to spy on Carter Page. That's just one small aspect. The IG said over 100 times the FBI violates their own Woods procedures. He says, well, I don't know if violating their own procedures from the perspective of the oppositions constitutes what we would call corruption. I don't know about the FBI changing an email, so I don't know what to say there. I said, exactly. You don't know because journalists and commentators like Shapiro excuse the blatant corruption as possible incompetence. And then I link a Washington Examiner article. Now, I will bring up the Washington Examiner. Now, follow with me. It gets a little better here in a second, I assure you. Let's just go through this real quick. FBI lawyer under criminal investigation altered document to say Carter Page was not source for another agency. The FBI became close to correcting a mistake in the third and final warrant application renewal targeting one-time Trump campaign advisor Carter Page, but an FBI lawyer improperly altered a document to cover up the Bureau had aired in the previous filings. In a report released on Monday, Justice Department Inspector Horowitz offered a detailed description of the actions taken by Kevin Clinesmith, then FBI lawyer who was part of the special counsel Mueller's team. Horowitz, who looked into the allegations of the FISA abuse, found the FBI made mistakes in omissions on the Russia investigation, but did not determine that political bias had tainted the effort. He didn't determine that it didn't either, and that's a mistake that's often made. Remember, Horowitz's job wasn't to come out and say, I have 100% proof that this was done in the name of bias. He said that he saw the bias with many of the agents, but he couldn't definitively prove that bias was the reason for this. He later concludes in his interview saying in front of Congress that there's only two possible explanations for the 17 times that they isolated huge mistakes plus the 100 plus Woods procedures violations. There's only two explanations, incompetence or corruption. That's what the IG said. But the media is going to spin it as we didn't find evidence of corruption. Clinesmith is not named in the Horowitz report, but it's clear he's the Office of General Counsel attorney who had been acting in response. Supervising Agent 2 swore in an affidavit at all three FISA against Page in 2017, told Horowitz investigators on the third renewal he wanted a definitive answer to whether Page had ever been a source for a U.S. government agency. It was the CIA. While contact was reported with the CIA, Clinesmith was reminded that back in August 2006, predating the first Page warrant application in October 2016, the other agency informed the FBI that Page did, in fact, have a prior relationship with that agency. An email from the other government agency liaison was sent to Clinesmith, who then altered the liaison email by inserting the words "not a source" into it, thus making it appear that the liaison had said that Page was not a source for the other agency. Now again, I've used the example of fingerprints. Let's say that fingerprints are found at a crime scene and the cops want to bury me. So they say, aha! Those have to be Rob's fingerprints. He committed the crime. So they send him off for analysis and it comes back, no, they're not my fingerprints. It would be incredibly corrupt for the FBI to withhold that evidence, or the law enforcement agency to withhold that evidence. But it's even more corrupt that instead of withholding the evidence, you just fake it and say, actually, they were Rob's fingerprints. They changed the evidence to say the opposite of the truth. Relying upon this altered email, Clinesmith signed the third renewal application and again failed to disclose Page's relationship. Now, it goes on to talk, it's a lengthy article, I'm not going to read the rest of it, but it goes on to talk about what's going on and how there were scathing indictments of this action by the IG and whatever. Okay? That's clearly evidence of corruption, right? Let's define corruption. We'll use Merriam-Webster. There you can see one. Dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involving bribery. Merriam-Webster. Dishonest or illegal behavior, especially by powerful people such as government officials or police officers. Yes. Making up evidence to say the opposite of what it was so that you could get a warrant to spy on someone is corruption. That is abuse of people with power. That's corruption. Now, how can any of us deny that? That's corruption. You might make the claim, look, okay, it was corruption on behalf of this one FBI agent. Now, the problem with that is, but when you take it in line with all the other evidence, the 16 other examples of these grievous errors that were made, The fact that these were hand-picked teams, the fact that it was common knowledge that he had worked with the CIA, yet despite then getting an email from the CIA, all the people above Clinesmith that had to sign off on this warrant, they didn't bat an eye when it was like, oh, actually, he wasn't part of the CIA? These were hand-picked teams. All of that together shows it was widespread corruption. But nonetheless, I guess we could have a debate on whether or not the corruption was just one FBI official or it was the entire team or a big group on the team. But certainly it's corruption. It's not debatable. It's not. It was dishonest and abusive behavior by an agent, a law enforcement agent in a position of power. That's corruption. I just read you the definition. Now, let's see what was said. You ready? Here's the response. I mean, even in this article, it seems to not point to corruption of any kind. Let me repeat that. So he reads the article that says an FBI agent got evidence that showed, yes, this guy worked for the CIA, and changed it to say, no, this guy did not work for the CIA. And the response to that, and he's under criminal investigation for this. And the response to that from someone I consider an intelligent person is, I don't see how there's evidence of corruption in that article. That's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Wait until you hear why. So going on with this quote, he says, typically when we say corruption, we mean some sort of monetary or political influence. Okay, well, we know from the Washington Examiner article that he exhibited political bias, Clinesmith, in text that he was against Trump. But I haven't heard of any money changing hands, and Horowitz himself in the article rules out political reasons. No, he doesn't. He says he couldn't prove political bias had an effect on this. He doesn't rule it out. That's incorrect. I say, okay, whatever you say. The FBI fabricating evidence to spy on people connected to Trump, and you say that's not corrupt. He says, well, but it's not the FBI. It's just a lawyer who worked for the FBI and was instrumental, not to mention the other 16 times that they violated procedures and had critical errors. All went in the same direction. Never went towards exoneration. All went towards, whoops, we made a mistake. And it's to get Trump and to spy on people connected to him. I would really call this just cutting corners. Since it seems, according to the article, to only have smoothed things over rather than fundamentally change the investigation. Absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Remember, this was in addition to, you had Christopher Steele. Christopher Steele didn't claim that he heard anything. He didn't directly witness Trump getting peed on. He didn't directly witness Michael Cohen in Prague making deals to steal the election. Nope, he had a Kremlin official tell him all of this. So, when the FBI goes and talks to the Kremlin official tells them, yeah, this is all nonsense. All of it's garbage. I don't have evidence that Trump or anyone in his team did anything untoward with any Kremlin official. That's what this Kremlin official says. That was the source. So again, if I say that if there's a fire down the road and the cops come up to me and say, did you see anything suspicious with the fire? And I say, I didn't see anything, but my neighbor over here claims he saw a black van leaving the scene. And they go talk to my neighbor and my neighbor says, nah, I didn't see a black van. They're not going to say, okay, Rob said the neighbor said there was a black van leaving the scene and we talked to the neighbor and he told the truth. So therefore, there must have been a black van leaving the scene. My statement about what my neighbor said doesn't matter once law enforcement talks to the neighbor. The neighbor, I'm just the middleman. I'm cut out now. The law enforcement's docking directly to the witness. If the witness contradicts what I claim the witness said, then my claims no longer hold water. That's exactly what happened. But instead of the FBI giving up their case for some reason, they knew at that point the entire case was garbage. The primary subsource says, yeah, it's all garbage. So instead of saying, okay, pack it in, or instead of saying, well, we'll still submit what we have to the judge honestly and see what he does, instead they said, we'll say we talked to the source, we'll say he told the truth, but we won't say what he told the truth about was that it was all garbage. We'll leave the judge and assume that he told the truth about what Christopher Steele said he said. That's what they did, in addition to manufacturing evidence. I said, perhaps you should read the IG report before you say no corruption. He says, I mean, again, you're labeling it as manufacturing evidence. Yes, that's exactly what it was. But the article you posted, not my article, I didn't make you post it, implies it was a very minor thing. Even if that was, it doesn't imply that, but even if that was the case, it's still manufacturing evidence. You don't say, well, there was other evidence, so it was okay to manufacture some evidence. That's still corruption. He manufactured the evidence for a reason, because he was worried that he wouldn't be allowed to spy on Carter Page, who, by the way, was innocent, wasn't he? But they wouldn't be allowed to spy on him, and therefore other people connected to Trump and Trump himself, unless they had this evidence in that he put. Why else would he jeopardize breaking the law to put that in there? I say, why do you need a media outlet to tell you it's a big deal? The FBI manufactured evidence to spy on people connected to a president. That's corruption. You choose not to read the IG report, yet still claim there isn't evidence of corruption. This is exactly the garbage I was talking about with Ben Shapiro. He says, I don't think people should have to read the document after document themselves to determine from the ground up whether corruption occurred or not. That makes the process so prone to error and bias that I hardly expect a single person to come up with an even close answer. And I say, so you just rely on the media instead of reading this is just like with the Mueller report. Oh, Bill Barr, I don't like how Bill characterized the Mueller report. Okay, well, the Mueller report's there for all of us to read. Talk about the part in the report that you want to talk about. No, I don't like how someone else characterized it. Dude, the report's right there. Show me the parts you want me to read. Nah, I don't want to read the report myself. How can you claim there's not corruption if you're unwilling to read the source material? Instead, you're going to be like, look, I'll listen to what CNN and the Washington Examiner says. And if they don't say it's corruption, then it must not be corruption. So I said, you rely on the media to tell you if the FBI faking evidence to spy on people connected with the president is corrupt? He says, you just relied on the media yourself. I relied on the exact same article you provided, ostensibly so I could read and get knowledge from. It's not like the Washington Examiner hates Trump. I'd go so far as to say they'd say corruption if they thought so. I say I didn't rely on the media. I used the media to show you what was done. It's a simple way. Instead of saying, here's 400 pages, read it. Look, here's articles saying that there's a criminal investigation. They admit that what this person's done. They give the quotes from the IG showing he manufactured this evidence. He says, but isn't doing all this work yourself as opposed to relying on many independent people working on it? Yes, with biases, but some opposing bias, prone to extreme error and bias? Do you see this? And wouldn't the Washington Examiner have labeled it corrupt if it was? What's their bias? Okay, so I didn't even mention to him, there's plenty of people that were saying it was corrupt, right-wing people like Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Dan Bongino, other people at Fox, people at OAN, left-wing people like The Intercept was saying it was corrupt. Jimmy Dore was saying it was corrupt, a left-wing commentator. I'm not even going to make that argument because the entire argument that's being had here is a philosophical one. And it's one that I've sort of had with this person before, which is that we need to have an appeal to authority. We have to trust the experts. And that's why I bring this up today, because it goes right along with the video I just did about COVID, where there is this thought that if something's corrupt, the media would tell us. If the experts tell us the virus will kill millions, then we have to listen to them. It doesn't matter if we could point out obvious factual errors that they make again and again and again. So we have to listen to Neil Ferguson, head of the Imperial College study, even though 5 or 6 times in the past he said, this pandemic's going to kill tens of thousands, and it killed a couple hundred people. Well, it doesn't matter that he's 0 for 5. Now we have to believe him. He's an expert. Doesn't matter that the entire media proves their corruption again and again, proves that they're peddling fake news again and again, proves that they were wrong about, the entire Russia hoax for the 2 years that they were spinning it. We still have to believe the media. And it's not even that the media said this isn't corrupt, it's that they didn't say it is corrupt, which is even worse. So now omissions by the media are still something that we can't talk about, even if we have the evidence. So this person's argument is the FBI, he's not contending, FBI agents manufactured evidence to say the opposite of the truth. But he's unwilling to say that's corrupt unless the Washington Examiner says it. How, and in fact, if you're the type of person that looks at the source material yourself, you could have errors and biases. So instead, you should just rely on the Washington Examiner or CNN or MSNBC. You can see it. The media said Kavanaugh guilty till innocent, Biden innocent until guilty. Well, we have to accept that. We just have to accept that. Because if we actually look at the claims made by Reid or Christine Blasey Ford ourselves and come to our own conclusion, well, we're not experts. Leave that up to the high-minded media people. I mean, it's unreal. I say this is an appeal to authority fallacy. The fact you need a media outlet to tell you a law enforcement agency making up evidence is corrupt shows how dangerous these types of appeals are. He says, I'm not appealing to authority. I'm not saying the Washington Examiner is right because of who they are. I'm saying that they have their own people, and those people independently arrived at the same conclusion as those other outlets. It's a consensus. It's not a consensus. One, other media outlets were saying it was corrupt. Two, they never said it's not corrupt. Three, it doesn't matter. If someone murders someone, and CNN reports on it and doesn't say, by the way, this murder was immoral, that doesn't mean I can say, well, I can't make a judgment on the morality of murder. Or better yet, he'll say a morality judgment's different, as we'll see later. If someone directly outlines, for example, if we found O.J. Simpson, we found a video showing him, he went up to Nicole Brown Simpson and her boyfriend, he stabbed them and killed them. But they don't say that that's murder. They just say he killed him. Then it would be unjust for me to say murder. Well, none of the media outlets said murder. They just said he killed him. So we can't say it's murder. It's ridiculous. I say fine, that it's an appeal to majority. You are literally saying you can't determine if the FBI making up evidence to spy on someone is corrupt. This is unreal. He says, I mean, what I'm doing is not fallacious. It's impossible to go through life without trusting someone other than yourself. Or people who agree with you for information. That's how flat earthers get their start. You see? I'm like the flat earthers. Because I could look at something without looking at any media case. I didn't need to see one media report. Investigators tell me this guy was for the FBI. He made up evidence to say the opposite of what it was so he could get a warrant to spy on someone. I say, that happened? Yes, absolutely that happened. Okay, that's corrupt. But wait a minute, don't you want to hear what Fox News says about it? No, that's corruption. Period. It's corruption. Somehow this equates to me saying, oh, you have to trust some people in life and clearly you don't. Therefore, this mentality leads to flat earthing. How insane can this get? I said this is how serial killers get their start. Unless a group of professionals tell you killing a particular person is wrong, you can't make that judgment for yourself. He says, no, that's just silly. There's a huge difference between centralizing data from multiple sources across multiple different outlets and basic morality. I don't rely on news outlets to tell me whether it's right to kill or not, LOL. No, you just rely on them to determine if faking evidence is corrupt or not. I said lying and manufacturing evidence is immoral as well and corrupt. He says, okay, we're back to the original point, which I'm saying is not correct in your framing since we wouldn't normally call what they did corrupt. And since multiple news sources, including some favorable to Trump, did not label it as such, nor did Horowitz. And I'm not going to bore you with more of this. That's what we're dealing with. Now, why did I bring this up? Because this sort of mentality, it's going to be the same with Michael Flynn. This is where the Republicans fall short. We have the facts on our side. We do. Flynn's innocent. We know that. He was railroaded. We know that. We know that Strzok's corrupt. We know that he had bias and that bias 99.9% affected all of the mistakes that he happened to make in both the Hillary and the Trump investigations. We know that. But what's important, and I say this all the time, is you have the establishment globalist type people, and then you have us that are fighting against that, and then the majority of the people are somewhere in the center. They're either ignorant, or they don't care, they don't think, or they don't think it affects them. Whatever the case may be. And I'm not saying those people are inferior to me or anything like that. Many people have difficult jobs. They don't have time to sit around and look at things like I do. I totally get that. Or they're so disgusted by what they perceive as corruption all over the place that they're like, I can't even stomach to look into stuff. I get it. For our side to win, we need to wake these people up to just how corrupt this is. For the establishment to win, they need to keep those people ignorant of the corruption. You see here how even intelligent people, this wasn't an ill-spoken person that you could see that I'm having this conversation with. I've done plenty of videos with them. You can see how even they can fall victim to the propaganda that's coming through. So this person believes, look, I trust the media as experts so implicitly that I assume that if there was corruption, the media would be talking about it. So if they're not, then it must be true. If all the media is saying that this Russia collusion stuff happened, then it must be true. Later on in that, I say, what about the Iraq war? We couldn't have, if you were one of the few people that looked at the media and said, nah, I don't see proof to go to the Iraq war, his argument would have said, hey, you're wrong. You have to trust the experts. You have to trust the media. I would, that mentality of actually looking at the evidence yourself and coming to conclusions would lead to flat earth. Right, Pat. The fact he was indicted, it proves Russia did something, right? All of the, and it's no joke, like it's a joke and it's fun to laugh about a lot of this stuff, but it's no joke how effective the other side is. And I ended my show the other day talking about this. My mistake, Wednesday was my show. My mistake was I was arrogant and I thought that we were waking people up. And some people were being woke up to just how biased the media is, how crappy they are, how corrupt all this is. But the truth is, we weren't waking up near as many people as we thought. And that's evidenced by people's total willingness to accept the taking away of their rights without any proof that it's necessary or that it will help, without any proof, and blindly accept it. And not only blindly accept it, but some of the biggest people that claimed to understand media corruption and understand that, the left was going to try to collapse the economy and do what they can to go after Trump and that socialism's bad. Some of those very same people are the strongest advocates for trillions of dollars of redistribution of wealth, shutting down people and saying the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is just a piece of paper. Let's be honest, we got crushed. Absolutely crushed. That's what happened. I had hubris. I thought that we were waking more people up than we were. And when the most dire situation came, which was the biggest example of infringement on rights I've seen in my lifetime, we were utterly smoked. The vast majority of this country pleaded for the government to take their rights away. Pleaded for it to collapse the economy. They're snitching on people that they see not wearing masks or jogging. So we have to regroup. I'm not going to give up. We regroup. So the Flynn situation, Flynn's exonerated. The people we elect, the Republicans, lose the narrative every time. You think that they're going to win the narrative that, yes, Flynn was innocent? No, they'll say, oh, finally, Michael Flynn's been found innocent. It's a great day. It's a great day. Meanwhile, the Democrats will be out there, Barr's corrupt. Flynn lied. He admitted he lied. And Barr refuses to prosecute him for it. This is an outrage. Actually, Flynn, but Flynn didn't do it. It's time to move on. Flynn didn't do anything. Or you have Lindsey Graham. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to hold investigations. We'll have some investigations into what's going on here. Good line, Lindsey. That's what the Republicans will do. The Democrats, again, they control the media. They control the entertainment industry. They control academia. They control Silicon Valley. They're going to be out there pushing. Flynn's guilty. This is corrupt. The average person that's not looked into the story is going to be like, so wait a minute. This guy pleaded guilty. Right? Okay. He pleaded guilty, and then he was an ally of Trump, so Trump's team basically was like, well, we're not going to charge him anyways. That's what the average person's going to get. I can make the case. I can go through. There are other people that can make the case as good or better than me. But we don't have the big platforms. We're not the people in the seats of power. As long as the Republicans constantly play defense, oh, no, I'm not a racist. Oh, no, I'm not a sexist. Oh, blah, blah, blah. They will continue to lose. And people like us, regular people, whether you're on the left or right, that just want to see this corruption ended, we'll continue to celebrate like crazy small victories like, hey, you know that guy whose life they ruined for 3 years? Yeah. Hey, guess what? They finally let him off the hook. Yeah! Only had his life ruined for 3 years. Woo! What a victory! And again, I'm not belittling it. It is a victory for Flynn and his family to finally be done with this. But the real victory will be when the criminals are brought to justice. That's what I asked watching Trains Go By. Trains Go By says, if he believes looking at evidence yourself and coming to the conclusion the earth is flat, and he believes the earth is round, does that mean he only believes the earth is round because of the mainstream media? Yeah, great question. Or if you only trust the experts, then wouldn't that mean when, you first had Pythagoras say the earth is round and everyone else said, no, the earth is flat. Well, hey, all the experts say the earth is flat. We got to trust the experts, right? Or when we had almost all the experts and people in power say, no, slavery is a good institution. It's not corrupt. Well, hey, we can't say slavery is corrupt. All the people in positions of power say it's not corrupt. I mean, that's nonsense. There's a time and a place to listen to experts on particular fields. Calling the mainstream media experts on anything is a joke. Me saying I'm distrusting of a mainstream media because I could show time after time after time how they've lied is different than me saying I'm not going to trust a scientist that says the earth is round. Well, then you're welcome here, Pat, if you're bouncing from side to side, because I welcome people on the left, right, whatever. Even if you disagree with me, that's fine. I still like talking to you. That person I'm talking to there, I think that's some crazy, on that Twitter feed, that's some crazy opinions, but I'll still talk to that person, be friends with them. I am kind of a jerk, though, when I'm arguing with someone. I get a little heated sometimes, and I need to work on that. But that's what being a free thinker is about. You shouldn't listen to me or Bush or Trump or Obama or Pelosi or the Washington Examiner, whatever. If you're saying I rely on them to formulate my opinions, you're making a huge mistake. Even if ultimately you conclude differently than me, that's fine. So that's where we are with the Flynn stuff. Let me get more specific. I haven't talked a lot about the Flynn stuff and the FISA abuse and all this. Those of you that have followed me know that I kind of have a disagreement with some Q people. Not all Q people. Let me rehash my stance again. If you're someone who follows Q and you do it because it encourages you to do your own research and you've come up with things that you know are now objective truths that you can see this corruption, good for you. Absolutely. But there are people in Q that have done things like, for example, when, what's his name? McCabe was left off the hook. It was an infuriating situation. We had him dead to rights, lying to Congress. Same with Comey, same with Brennan, same with Clapper. They were all left off the hook. Declined to be prosecuted. Remember, the IG, Horowitz, recommended that Comey be referred to for criminal prosecution for leaking classified information and FBI-owned information, and Bill Barr declined. He declined. And so when I point out my anger at things like this, some Q people, not all, would say to me, oh, you need to shut up and trust the plan. You've lost your faith. That's ridiculous. Again, the way I put this is, I hope that Q was right. I do. I hope that ultimately justice will come to all of these criminals. But I don't think Q's a prophet. I think Q's an insider or a group of insiders, and they're hopeful. They hope their side wins, but they don't know for sure their side's going to win. Right? And so if I'm wrong and Q takes care of everything, who cares what I say? But if I'm right, all of these Q supporters that were encouraging people like me not to get upset and not to go to the truth with people showing that it's unjust that people like Comey weren't prosecuted are making a huge mistake. At that point, you're actually playing right into Comey's hands. Instead of reaching out to people and saying, look, here's why Comey's corrupt, here's why we need to demand prosecution of him right now, you're actually telling the people demanding that prosecution, you need to be quiet. There's a bigger plan. Comey couldn't be laughing, but yeah, you tell him. So, here's something that I haven't heard other people say, but I think if you think it through, I think I'm right. This is just my opinion, though. I don't have proof. I think that Trump was sitting on a bunch of evidence that was damning for the FBI and people like Comey and maybe people in the Democratic Party and people in the Obama administration and Obama's DOJ and the media and people like Adam Schiff. For example, One of those such documents would be the documents we saw that were released about Flynn, showing that they wanted him fired or prosecuted. Why? That's not how police normally act. I just don't like this guy. You know, imagine, we have surveillance footage of Rob walking into a convenience store. It shows he didn't do anything wrong. You know what, though? We're going to call him in because we hate him and we want him to get fired or go to jail. So we're going to grill him on every last thing that he did in that convenience store. There's no crime that was committed, but we're going to grill him on what happened in that convenience store. And if he messes one thing up, he's fired or he's indicted. What would be the purpose of that unless they had some reason to dislike me? And that's not the job of law enforcement. So anyways, Trump's been sitting on this. He had the ability to declassify it, but he didn't. Why? Is it 4D chess? I think it's simpler than that. Trump, look, I support him. The reason I voted for Trump, I've been quite adamant and vocal about this. I've said things he's done I don't like. I've been very on Trump about this COVID response. You can say what you want about me. Maybe I'm not the smartest person in the world, not the most clean-shaven person in the world. Maybe not even the funniest, though I find that hard to believe. But I'm being honest. I'm authentic. I'm not just taking one side and sticking with it. I'll call out my perceived side if I think they deserve it. I did it with the Syria attack. I did it with the deficit spending. I did it with not prosecuting people like Comey. I did it with sometimes some of the dumb things he says, but not most of them. And I certainly did it with COVID, adamantly. But why I voted for Trump and why I want him to win again in 2020 is very simple. It's not even because anything Trump did. It is because the establishment on both sides, your Romney, McCain's, or your Clintons, or your Bushes, or your Obama and people connected to him, all of those people, it's one big club. And they don't want even a perceived outsider. Even if you say, I don't think Trump's an outsider, they thought of him as such, and that's evidenced by how corrupt they were in trying to keep him from winning and then trying to get him out once he won. Why else would they be illegally spying on him? Why else would Rod Rosenstein use Kremlin-sourced disinformation paid for by Hillary Clinton to launch an investigation into Trump? Remember, we knew that Rosenstein knew the Steele dossier was garbage. He knew that claims of violating the Logan Act were garbage. Yet he still put that within the scope of investigating Flynn. Rosenstein claimed the big reason we needed Mueller was because Trump fired Comey. But Rosenstein's the one who wrote the memo telling Trump to fire Comey. So think of it this way. Rosenstein's like, hey, Trump, I know you've been having some problems with Comey. I think that there's too much going on here. You know, neither side trusts him at this point. I think it's bad for the agency to have him in charge. I'm going to go ahead and write a letter recommending you fire him. Trump's like, great. So Trump gets the letter, recommends the firing. And Rosenstein's listening to Trump fire him and go, that's strange. I wonder why Trump fired Comey. Well, how would he have got that in his head? I better employ a special counselor to look into this. I know. I'll choose Comey's mentor. And then he'll appoint a bunch of Democrats. Who believed that story? No one believed that. That's obviously nonsense. Now we know, despite being told that Steele dossier had nothing to do with the scope of Mueller's investigation. That was a lie. That's exactly what he was investigating. Mueller was supposed to be investigating Russian interference, yet somehow he and his entire huge report didn't breathe word one about the most effective Russian interference into our system. And that was the Kremlin-sourced disinformation that his own investigation proved was disinformation and was sourced by Kremlin, according to him in his report. He didn't bother to investigate it. I wonder why, if that was his task to investigate Russia interference. I wonder why Joseph Mifsud, who according to Mueller and his team, was the original Russian spy, who set into gear the very first person they needed to investigate, George Papadopoulos. He set that in gear. Mifsud was the first person that mentioned them having dirt on Hillary Clinton, which later the fear was it was the hacked emails. Now Mueller admitted in his report that the FBI said they interviewed Mifsud and he lied to them 3 times. Now they accused Michael Flynn of lying, and he still to this day, finally today, has been let off the hook for the prosecution of that. Yet the war hero, that you claim lied, even if it was true he lied, which he didn't, you're going to go after him with both barrels blazing. But the actual Kremlin spy, the person you're saying is the Kremlin spy, that also lied to the FBI, that's the start of this entire thing. Somehow you didn't manage to indict him. You indicted the people that were the Russian trolls that were posting on Pokemon Go, but not the high-level spy that started the whole thing. How does that make sense? Well, because Mifsud was a Western intelligence asset, not a Russian spy, because it was a setup from the get-go. That's what we're going to find out. So if that's true, then certainly Mueller's corrupt. And if not, and he's incredibly incompetent. Every time we have a high-level Russian that's actually doing real interference, according to him, according to Mueller's team, they let him off the hook. We do my best Denny Green here. You remember him, former coach of the Cardinals? Mifsud is who we thought he is. And we let him off the hook. You check that out. Him yelling about the Chicago Bears back in 2004 or something. It's one of the best sports interviews ever. The Bears are who we thought they were. We let him off the hook. He slams the mic. Good stuff. Gotta laugh. But, yeah, we did know this since 2016. Yeah, the investigation went on. The media, right? We have to trust the media. That's what my friend was saying. I got to trust the media. The media all said the Russia hoax was real. The Mueller investigation was legit. Right? We have to trust them. So now getting back to what's going on with Trump then. So Trump has all this evidence. He's just an outsider. He's a potential outsider, right? That's it. That's why I voted for Trump, because I knew if we got an outsider or someone that the establishment thought was an outsider, that they wouldn't be able to help themselves. And I said this before the election. And it would out the corruption between the establishment, the media, the Democratic Party, the intelligence agencies, unelected bureaucrats, wealthy donors, lobbyists, and it would show how corrupt they all were. And that's exactly what happened. Is there any doubt in anyone's mind that this corruption's been shown clearer than it's ever been in the history of our country? There is no doubt that 90% of the mainstream media is just a mouthpiece for the intelligence agencies and the Democratic Party. There is no doubt that rhinos like Mitt Romney and John McCain would have rather seen Hillary Clinton elected than Donald Trump. There's no doubt whatsoever that the FBI is corrupt. I guess unless you think they're the most incompetent organization ever. And that the FBI was weaponized worse than Watergate. Instead of sending two bumbling fools to spy on his opponent, Barack Obama had the most powerful investigative agency in the history of the world spy on his opponent. All of this out in the open. We see leaders of the FBI now in a revolving door position with the media. We have them blatantly lying to Congress and not being charged with it. We have the FBI smashing evidence of crimes for Hillary Clinton and raiding Trump people in the middle of the night for decades-old crimes. We have CNN showing up when the FBI raids Roger Stone because they were tipped off by the FBI. Is there any doubt at this point that they're all one big team? We have the Democrats actually pushing against possible cures for COVID because Trump suggested it. We have them saying the concept of innocent until proven guilty is now reversed. Only though, if you're a woman accusing a Republican. If you're a woman accusing a Democrat, then we don't trust you. Or we believe you, as Lisa Bloom says. We think you're a rapist, but we're still going to vote for you because a rapist is better than a Republican. All of that's been outed, not because of things Donald Trump did, but because of who Donald Trump is, a potential outsider. I don't think that he's someone who set all this up, this master web. I think he's just who he is. And these people who have been unchallenged in their total control of our system of governance for so long were so arrogant, they were like, you know what? We can't let this stand. We're going to be transparent. I mean, Chuck Schumer came out and said, you can't criticize the FBI. The most powerful elected leader in the world can't criticize underlings of him, the FBI, or the intel agencies, because they'll find 6 ways of Sunday of getting back at him. Our president has to be afraid of unelected bureaucrats, according to Chuck Schumer. No one batted an eye. That's why I voted for Trump. Does that mean I support everything he's done? No. And that's why I'll vote for him again in 2020. But if those criminals aren't held to account, then it was all for naught. In fact, exposing them and then not charging them is almost worse. Because now the precedent's set. People just learn to accept it. It was a great segment Tucker had the other night. We're no longer shocked by totalitarianism. Oh, what's that? A police officer went and arrested a woman that opened her salon, got 7 days in jail. Yeah, not surprised. Of course. Stay-at-home orders? Yep. Oh, they arrested someone holding a wedding at their own home? Yep. Yeah, sure. Chicago mayor, she's trying to lock people up for getting haircuts while she's out getting a haircut? Yep. Cuomo yelling, the people should face criminal prosecution for not wearing masks while he's not wearing a mask? Yep. His brother telling people it's immoral and they are terrible people for breaking the lockdown while he broke the lockdown and was actually supposedly diagnosed with coronavirus? So what did Trump do? Is it he's walking a tightrope? I don't think so. I've yet to hear, even from Q people, give me a credible explanation, for example, why McCabe shouldn't have been charged. Give me a credible explanation for why Bill Barr shouldn't have pursued charges against James Comey when the IG criminally referred him. This is along the lines of what I hear. Well, see, it takes a while, and the web's weaving, and if they charged him with the crimes now, then that would somehow jeopardize charging them with pedophilia and things down the road. Child sex trafficking rings. Why? In every investigation in history, except the FBI's investigation of Hillary Clinton, you charge people with the lower level crimes you could prove, then you put them on ice so they have no chance of escaping or anything, and then you charge them with the further crimes. Simple. Q could not have predicted the COVID pandemic. He or she didn't. And now, most Americans could care less about the plight of Michael Flynn. You want to know why? Because they're struggling to survive. 30 million people, working age people now, lost their jobs. Unemployed. How many of them do you think right now are like, hey, check this story about Michael Flynn? 2%? Whereas if things were going well, and this Flynn situation would have occurred, and the evidence would have been released months ago, then it would have been a bigger story that people would have paid more attention to. But the priorities have shifted. That's why you don't play 4D chess. And here's what I'm getting to. What Trump did, it's really simple to me to see what he was doing. He's fallible. He's human. Again, I didn't vote for him for the actions he takes all the time, but more of who he is, a potential outsider. He was thinking, I'm furious that I was targeted this way, which, by the way, he's human and has every right to be. And so he said, I will get justice for this, but I'll also use it to my advantage politically. And that was the mistake. Instead of outing the corruption years ago when he could have, which would have possibly then shifted the 2018 election so that the Democrats wouldn't have got control and further stymied him with the impeachment scandal and further hampered him and forced them to go along with so many of their agendas in this lockdown, if he would have declassified the evidence when he saw the corruption, people could be being held accountable right now. But instead he said, I'll hold off until we're close to the election. Then it'll be fresh on everyone's mind. If he announces it in 2018, then possibly the Democrats could get rid of the corrupt people and say, okay, that was bad, but we're going to put different people that weren't involved with that corruption up. No. Trump says, I want them to put someone connected to the past administration as my opponent. I want Joe Biden. That way, we'll hold off on all the crimes that he committed, the Burisma stuff, all the stuff with the FISA gate that the Obama administration's connected to. We'll hold off on all of it until 3-4 months outside the election. Then we'll spring it. Then it'll be fresh in everyone's mind. I'll win the election. Only problem is he underestimated the corruption from the other side. Now, people don't care about FISA gate. People don't care about Flynn as much. They care about trying to survive because of this lockdown. Michael says, my thoughts on the tightrope was he's had so many things target him. He has constantly make sure he's being clear with what he says because they're always trying to throw him out of context. But yeah, absolutely. I don't begrudge that type of stuff. But he was sitting. How long have they been sitting on this evidence, for example? For example, how long did they know that the Steele dossier was garbage? How long did they sit on the FISA application? Years? Why? Why not, as soon as they knew, why leave the whole circus go? And people say, well, that was the point, to leave the corrupt people out themselves. We know at this point. Is there one person out there? It's like, if we wait one more week and we let the media be corrupt, we'll finally get that last person on board that's like, yep, the media is corrupt. At this point, you know or you don't. And the people that don't, the only way they're going to be convinced is by showing them proof in the form of declassifying these documents. Instead, what you've done is you've led a slow matriculation so that people slowly, like the boiling frog theory, they see a little more corruption, see a little more corruption, see a little more corruption, and they learn to accept it. Yeah, I could accept this corruption. Yeah. Yep. And you see it in the defense of, right, when the story came out about Strzok and the other agent texting, we need to get this guy fired or lie so we could criminally prosecute him. It's a shocking story. That's entrapment by the FBI. Entrapping a member, what's the word I'm looking for? Of the cabinet, of a incoming president. What's the biggest excuse that's been given? Well, that's how the FBI does business. That's what the blue checkmark Dems are saying right now, which my jaw dropped. I said, wait a minute. See, you were like, well, here's the FBI entrapping someone, and you're like, that's okay, they entrap everyone. That's not a defense of the FBI. That's a further indictment of the FBI. But we just now accepted the average person. Of course that's what they do, of course. The FBI manufactured evidence to say the opposite of the truth to spy on Trump's team? Yeah, of course. It's just a little thing. Yeah. The media's not that concerned about it. And now, even the people that would have been woken up had they seen the evidence, they're struggling to survive because of this pandemic. Yeah, and let me say, I've met plenty of Q people. My friend Mike at the Patriot Hour, we might disagree. What I say is we're looking at things on different levels. But we're friends. We both have the same goal. I hope he's right. I hope I'm wrong and he's right. And that this Q thing does come to fruition. I do. But the way he uses it is, he's using it to make predictions and to see things because he's using Q as a platform to ask questions and to do research. That's fine. That's great. That's a great thing. I don't begrudge anyone that. And again, I'll say this for the millionth time. I don't begrudge anyone any, quote, conspiracy theory they have, whatever word you want to use. The official narrative is Epstein killed himself. That's the most ridiculous conspiracy theory I've ever heard. So I'm not going to make fun of Alex Jones or someone or anyone who believes in Q. Of course not. They absolutely could be right. I don't know. All I know is I interpret things through the lens of my life experience and what makes sense to me. When I see an obvious criminal like James Comey, who's referred criminally by the IG and is caught dead to rights for crimes that I could prove to you if you give me 2 minutes, based on publicly available evidence, and he's let go by Trump's team, that doesn't make sense to me. And I'm not going to suspend my belief because there could be something in the ether out there, some bigger plan. I guess that's true, but I could have said the same thing about Barack Obama. I could have said hypothetically, look, I know all of you patriots think that Obama's a bad person and he's selling out the country with the Iran deal. But in reality, it's all part of his 20-year plan that he's pretending to be on the globalist side to infiltrate them so that 15 years from now, he could work his way up in the UN and then finally spring the trap and prove how corrupt the UN and all these globalists are. I guess that could be true. That's not going to stop me from criticizing Obama's policies that are detrimental to the United States. But again, I don't begrudge someone. I mean, I don't want someone coming on here being like, I don't like you because of the way you think. So I don't begrudge anyone involved in the Q movement. I'm just saying, not for me. I hope the Q movement's right. I hope that these people face justice. I don't see it. I'm jaded because I've seen these criminals walk my entire life and engage in this corruption. So until I see a change, I'm not just going to believe it on faith. That's it. And I encourage everyone, have robust discussions, whether you believe it or not. But I encourage you to have an open mind and listen to people that agree with Q, that disagree with Q, and have, constructive conversations about it. That's all. Right, Gunner Granny. That's exactly a correct mindset to have. You keep an open mind, look at the stuff Q. There's evidence that Q's presented that no doubt has came true. No doubt. Now, other people were presenting evidence too. It wasn't just Q, and I think that there are things that I've seen people make predictions based on Q that turned out to be wrong. Again, I'm not saying throw it all out or whatever. I'm just saying I could see, I think there's a credible argument that you could say. I've heard people say, no, Q's a psyop. Q's actually the other side. Q's about making people complacent. Let them think they're involved in this big thing, and then encourage them to discourage people from seeking justice for these obvious criminals because there's a bigger plan in the future. And then if Trump loses in 2020, then what? I'm not saying that's true, but I'll be willing to listen to that. I'll listen to the Q people that say that mindset's ridiculous. That's all. So, what time is it for? Yeah, I'm still good for a little bit. So, if I could ask you all for a favor, what I would like you to do, if you really could, I'd really appreciate this. The YouTube video I did today, I don't know. Sometimes I do stuff that I think is better than other stuff. Now, granted, this video is not for everyone. It's 44 minutes. And I get that that's a lot to watch. I totally understand that. I don't know why you guys sit here and listen to me ramble for as long as on these live streams as long as I do. But I'm trying to do these non-live streams and, these just regular videos, and I can't get any traction on them at all. I think this video is very important, and I'll put the link to it up here now, because it shows how did we get where we are, right? It's just like, let's look at the Flynn situation. The FISA abuse situation. Why is it so important to look at the stories of George Papadopoulos and Carter Page? Because that's how we got where we are. It explains exactly the roadmap that was used to justify the corruption that we're now seeing today. It started with this. It started with Papadopoulos. And I've done videos that explain before you know anything else about Papadopoulos and what went on there, the entire structure of the story makes no sense for leading to this elaborate FBI investigation, etc. Remember, here's the bare bones of the story without getting into the facts, which makes it even more skeptical. But the bare bones are this. Some employee that was low level that Trump basically never met or met just in passing, didn't have a close relationship with, was told by someone that Russians had information on Hillary Clinton. He goes back to Trump's team and says, should I try to set this up? Trump's team says no. Then he goes back and he talks to this Russian, and the Russian's like, yeah, we have emails. And the guy says, okay. And then he's drunk at a bar and he sees an Australian diplomat and he says, hey man, I heard the Russians have emails on Hillary Clinton. That's it. That's what started a 3-year investigation into Trump and his team. That's the structure of that story makes no sense. So you mean to tell me that all I have to do, if I'm a political presidential nominee or congressional or Senate nominee or whatever, is just say, hey, I heard a low-level guy on the other side drunkenly say they heard that China has dirt on me. Oh, better investigate them. That makes no sense. Now, when you factor in, wait a minute. So this guy Mifsud, the FBI let him off the hook for no reason. Mueller decided not to investigate him. Alexander Downer, the Australian diplomat, instead of going through the Five Eyes channel, turns out that he met in private with people connected to Hillary or with Obama and the DOJ. Oh, it turns out that he was someone instrumental in getting millions of dollars sent to the Clinton Foundation. Oh, it turns out that Mifsud had connections to the Clinton Foundation and to Western intelligence assets. Oh, it turns out that they tried to give George Papadopoulos a briefcase full of cash before he got in a plane and then flew to America and then promptly detained him when he got off and looked for the cash because they tried to set him up. That's just the Papadopoulos story. That's not even getting into the FISA-gate stuff. It's important to look at the beginnings of these things. Because if the beginning was corrupt, everything that followed from it was corrupt. The same is true of this COVID crap. What have I said is the biggest threat to us? It's bad as it's not the virus, and it might get bad. It's not the economy, though that's going to be way worse than the virus. It could last 10, 15 years, the ramifications from that. But we'll survive that too. What we can't survive is setting a precedent that our rights, the Bill of Rights, is just a piece of paper to crumple up anytime the government says, hey, we got to crumple it up because there's something to be afraid of. We can't survive that. It'll be the end of the country. It'll wipe out the middle class. It'll take away our rights. It'll make us dependent on the government, which is exactly what they want. They want globalism. They want a neo-feudalism where everyone is dependent on daddy government, and daddy government will provide for us so long as you don't step out of line. The reason the United States is the greatest country in the world is because it codified the idea of the individual and personal freedom and personal liberty. Globalization and socialism and all of these isms are anathema to that. The biggest impediment to globalization and this neo-feudalism that they all desire is the middle class in the United States, the working class in the United States, people that are self-sufficient, people that just basically want the government to help them when they need a hand, but basically stay out of their lives. They don't like that. They want you dependent on the government. That's what this is about. And we see that that's exactly if we are willing to give up our rights out of fear of a virus that admittedly no one knew. No one knows. If we're willing to give up our rights then we'll be willing next time and the next time until there is no next time. And I get it. I'm not going to comply. I won't leave it be the new normal. But I was shocked at how many people did accept it. So what were we told? What models? Again, I was screaming till I was blue in the face. I lost tons of subscribers. I used to have 30, 40 people watching a stream like this. Now I'm down to 10 to a dozen. That's fine. I don't mind. Why? Because I criticized the government reaction. And the fact that Trump was for the government reaction because he was at the head of the federal government meant that I was a bad man because I criticized Trump. I don't care. I'm not going to sacrifice my freedoms just because my guy's in office. Don't care at all. What we saw was based on fear-mongering from the experts. We were told we couldn't even question. Not only can we disagree with the lockdown, we had to agree with it or we wanted people to die, but to even ask questions about it meant we wanted people to die. The government couldn't take time to answer questions. They couldn't take time to actually get a $6 trillion worth of spending that was supposed to be to fight this disease and to fight the economic collapse of it and people in a dire emergency. They couldn't even get that right. Oh, well, some money to the Kennedy Center and some money here and Harvard and Carnival Cruises and we were told, we don't have time to argue. The checks need to go out. We don't have time to just trust the government. It's that serious. We have to lock down. Just lock down now and we'll take care of it later. Your rights don't matter when people are dying. How many times did I hear that? What do you care more about the economy than old people dying? How many times did I hear that? Many times from conservatives. What was the model that was used? They wouldn't answer. Well, now we know. It was the Imperial College model. 2.2 million Americans dead. 500,000 Brits dead. All a lie. Completely debunked on the video I just did. That's 44 minutes. So I'm not going to rehash it all here. And again, I'll post the link to the video. Oh, I know. And I don't blame people if they can't personally make it and stuff. Of course, I'd like to support more people. I'm busy, By the time I'm flapping my gums here for hours, I don't have a lot of time to support other channels either. So I get it. But I'm just asking if people could share that video on their Facebook or their Twitter or, at least give it a like or a comment. That would be great. And I think the information in there is awesome. And what I do is I break it down into basically 5 sections. Let me see if I could remember. This first section is proving that the model that the Imperial College was used, which it was. I don't think I had to do much to prove that. It's admitted that it was instrumental in the UK. Trump cited the 2.2 million as recently as last week. Trump attacked Sweden, which is something that proponents of the model are doing, saying that they were wrong not to lock down. Then the second thing I do is go through the history of the leader of the Imperial College study, which is Neil Ferguson. Let me just real quick, I'll read that part. I think this is worth reading. Here's Neil Ferguson, right? This is from National Review. I guess I could bring it up. Why not? I'm actually on my above top secret account where I put this big thread. But from the National Review, you ready? Here's Neil Ferguson, the guy that led the Imperial College model, saying 2.2 million Americans would die in a do-nothing scenario. Indeed, Neil Ferguson has been wrong so often that some of his fellow modelers call him the master of disaster. Ferguson was behind the disputed research that sparked a mass culling of 11 million sheep and cattle during a 2001 outbreak of foot and mouth disease. He also predicted that up to 150,000 people could die. There were fewer than 200 deaths. Charlotte Reed, a farmer's neighbor, recalls, quote, "I remember the appalling time. Sheep were left starving in fields near us. Then came the open-air slaughter. The poor animals were panic-stricken. It was one of the worst things I've ever witnessed. And all based on a model, ifs, buts, and maybes." That's 2001. Predicted 150,000 would die. How many died? Less than 200. And we had to kill 11 million sheep and cattle. That's what that cost. Oops, my bad. Okay, moving on. He'll get it right next time, right? Neil Ferguson's your boy Neil Ferguson. He's the expert. We got to listen to him, right? My friend that I was talking to, have to default to the experts. Okay, we'll get him this time. 0 for 1. We'll get him this time, Neil Ferguson. Predicted 150,000 deaths. Oh, we're only off by almost 150,000. Less than 200 died. But you'll get him this time, right? Number 2. In 2002, Ferguson predicted that up to 50,000 people would likely die from exposure to mad cow disease in beef. In the UK, there were 177 deaths. Predicted 50,000. Less than 200 died again. He was about 50,000 off again. Huh. So totally, completely wrong. 0 for 2. Hey, man. Third time's a charm. He'll get it this time, right? In 2005, Ferguson predicted that up to 150 million people would be killed from the bird flu. In the end, how many people died? 150 million. So at least this time it had to be tens of thousands that ended up dying, right? In the end, only 282 people died worldwide from the disease between 2003 and 2009. So he started off strong, predicted 150,000 would die, and it ended up being less than 200. Then he was like, well, let's calm it down a little. The next year, I'll predict 50,000 will die of this disease, and it was less than 200. So then he's like, I'm going to go for the gusto. 150 million dead. How many die? 282. Not 1,000, mind you, just 282 people. One more time, right? 2009. A government estimate based on Ferguson's advice said a reasonable worst-case scenario was that the swine flu would lead to 65,000 British deaths. In the end, swine flu killed 457 people. That's the expert that you heard ad nauseum was said, we have to trust the experts. We have to trust the experts. Hey, he's an epidemiologist. You're not. It doesn't matter that he was wrong almost by 95%. Every single prediction he made. It doesn't matter that he cries wolf every year and says, we're all going to die, we're all going to die, and then almost no one dies. Nope, we have to listen to him without question. That's the model that we used. We couldn't question it. People still to this day pushing that model. How does that make any sense? Why is the default position, if we don't know, well, we don't know what this disease could do, so the default position is, better take away people's rights and collapse the economy. One of the very first things I said was, I refuse to accept this unless the government answers these questions. And one of the things I said was, can the government explain to me, it seems like every year we have some disease, West Nile, SARS, swine flu, H1N1, which I think was swine flu, MRSA, mad cow disease. Every year there's something, or every other year, there's a new disease. And I said, with all of those previous diseases, there was fear-mongering that tens of thousands or millions of people could die. So can you explain what's different this time? How can we be sure that the next time West Nile comes around, which I think we could all agree, that shutting down the economy and taking away our rights like this for months wouldn't have been worth it over West Nile? How do we know that the next West Nile that comes along, we haven't just set the precedent to shut down? And we could see this guy, the very guy that we're relying on, is that type of guy who every year says, it's the end of the world. This disease is going to kill us all. In what other field would you have the ear of two of the most powerful governments in the world and you've been that wrong that often? It wasn't just that he predicted 1,000 deaths and it ended up being 500. He was predicting millions and the deaths were in the hundreds. You literally could take a child and have them throw a dart at a board and how many people would die with just millions of numbers on the board, and they had a better chance of being more correct than Neil Ferguson. But that's the guy. We couldn't question it. Now the default is, look, if some guy who's been wrong over and over again says that a disease is going to wipe us out, then we have to lock down. We have to. And if he says it next year, we have to lock down again. I mean, it's unbelievable. Then there's problems, right? And I'm encouraging you to watch that video if you have time. It's 45 minutes, but there's problems with, or if you prefer, you could read my thread on Above Top Secret. My name's Grambler on there, but here's the thread. They talked about the do-nothing scenario. That's what would have led to the 2.2 million being dead and the 500,000 in the UK. Now, look, I'm using sources and links to experts and people that know more about this than me, but they're basically just making more sophisticated and evidentiary-backed arguments, but that are the exact same argument I was making. So one of the things I said was, we kept being told, did you notice this? Right? It's not a coincidence this happened. You had the do-nothing scenario of 2.2 million American dead. And then people kept accusing you if you said, wait a minute, I questioned this lockdown. Oh, so you don't want to do anything? You just want to let people die? I did not hear one person, certainly not anyone with a voice like, that even has an independent channel or that's involved in government, anywhere in the world. I didn't even hear random people on Facebook where you could hear all kinds of nuts. I didn't hear one person suggest we should do nothing in response to this virus. Not one person. I heard people say the lockdown is egregious, that we shouldn't redistribute money, but they would say things like, let's try to protect the vulnerable population. Let's try to tell people, hey, stay away from sporting events. Some people said we shouldn't shut down the sporting events, but still, if you're fearful, you shouldn't go. All of that is doing something. And when you look at the Imperial College study itself, it talks about these types of measures. People voluntarily choosing not to go to sporting events, for example. It talks about that as, you ready for this? A mitigation measure. So when they're do-nothing numbers, literally we're assuming that people didn't say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to go to the ball game. No one would say that. That's what their numbers assumed. That's garbage. No one was suggesting that. So that number is completely BS. There's no chance of that number. And I linked to a study from Harvard and MIT that shows, look, this is obviously garbage because these scientists know in the Imperial College that humans are adaptive. And even if governments aren't issuing policies, when you look around and you see something that's affecting your loved ones, your friends, your community, you automatically react to it in some way. So if you're predicting 2.2 million would have died in the United States, once we would have seen mass deaths, people would have mitigated on their own. It might not have been the lockdown that they were looking for, but still it wouldn't have been do nothing like they're claiming. So there was literally zero chance of their own model, the do nothing scenario, ever being achieved. Zero chance. In fact, at the time that the study came out, the United States had already taken some mitigation measures. For example, Trump banned flights from certain areas like China. Sporting events had already started to cancel. People were starting to voluntarily isolate themselves and practice social distancing. All of that occurred before the Imperial College issued their do-nothing model. So they knew that the number was garbage. Even they, in interviews, admitted, we think that this number is very unlikely. Unlikely? It's impossible. The conditions had already been passed for the scenario to be achieved. We'd already done something. Therefore, the do-nothing number couldn't be achieved. Yet, do you know someone give me another number from the Imperial College study. Give me a number. How many people will die with the mitigation that we saw at the time? How many people will die with the lockdown? You can't think of those numbers, but you know what number's burned into your head? 2.2 million dead. You think that's an accident? They took the biggest fear-mongering number. Even they knew it was complete garbage. Absolutely knew it. And that's the number they pushed. And everybody knew it was garbage. So I articulated that, but now I have scientific evidence from Harvard and MIT saying, yeah, clearly it was garbage. So why would they push it? If they're really just scientists and they weren't interested in fear-mongering, they were just giving you the raw data, why wouldn't they say, had nothing been done, which is an impossible scenario, it would have been 2.2 million. It looks like without changing the policies in the United States right now, we're likely to see something along the lines of 1.8 million dead. Even that number I think is wrong, but nonetheless, at least then it would have been more credible. But purposely pushing fear-mongering numbers that you know are unachievable. Now, that's not to say 2.2 million couldn't have died, but not based on the model that they were using. Here's another number that you haven't heard. Let me see this. They want to avoid the discussion, and this is part of the agenda of the power grab, and this is how you could tell that they're disingenuous. I did a video the other day. The same Neil Ferguson's the guy who told us all we had to be a lockdown. Then he got diagnosed with COVID. Then 11 days later was banging his mistress, who then went home and feared that she gave COVID to her husband. Good guy, right? And I said, that's how you know that this was garbage. That's one of the reasons, because the very people that are being the most authoritarian, advocating for the strictest enforcement policies, aren't following those guidelines themselves. If you were worried it was the apocalypse and millions of people were going to die, you'd damn sure follow those guidelines. But if you were just pushing it and you were only half believing it, then you wouldn't follow the guidelines. For example, if I said, if you have unprotected sex with someone with AIDS, there's a good chance you'll get AIDS. I'm not going to say, yeah, but I'm really horny, so I'll have unprotected sex with someone with AIDS. I wouldn't do it because I believed that lives would be endangered. Myself in that. So you're either a psychopath willing to jeopardize people's lives and possibly infect and kill them, or you didn't believe the stuff you were preaching. Either way, why should we be trusting you? But one of the things that they're seeking to avoid is a serious conversation on a cost-benefit analysis. And anytime you take any action to alleviate a problem, there's always a cost-benefit to it. If we're very honest, even the positions that we ourselves would advocate the strongest, let's say you're pro-legalization of marijuana. I think there's a lot of good arguments, freedom reasons to liberate or to legalize it. I think it's my body. I should be allowed to put what I want in it as long as I'm being reasonable, not negatively affecting other people. I could say that I think there's medical benefits, but that's low down the list. I could say it would help end the war on drugs, which has been a disaster, and it led to all sorts of violence and criminality, etc. But you have to admit there's downsides as well. It could lead to more people using marijuana. It could lead to, complacency to wanting other drugs to be legalized, etc. There's potential ups and downsides, and you weigh those, right? Like, let's take a better example, like Medicare for all. I'm against Medicare for all. It'll cost too much. I think it'll lower the quality of healthcare. I don't think the quantity is there. But there's certainly advantages. There are some people that would legitimately benefit from Medicare for all, for those that don't have insurance right now, that are reliant on the government. So we have to be honest. And if you're an honest person, you should do that. You should be willing to hear both sides of the argument. Why is it then that they've set the chips so that we can't make the other side of the argument? They set it up. You care more about your 401k than lives? That's absurd. Anyone who says that's never lived paycheck to paycheck like me. You think I'm concerned about my 401k? I wish. I'm concerned about putting food on the table, which you can tell I eat a lot of. I'm concerned about paying my mortgage. I'm concerned about keeping the lights on. And even more than I'm concerned with my parents, I have a 16-year-old sister doing the same. I'm an essential worker, so I've been allowed to keep working, not my dad. So it's just flip it. And not to mention, literally lives will be lost because of the lockdown, and quality of life for millions of people will be diminished. So to just act like, oh, you either agree with me or you want people to die, it's nonsense. Again, I could show you studies right now that they're predicting 1.5 million people around the world could die of tuberculosis because of these lockdowns. Does that mean that the people advocating the lockdowns want 1.5 million? They don't care about 1.5 million people dying? They would say, of course not. We just think we'll save more lives than that by the lockdown. Okay, you did a cost-benefit analysis. I'm saying you're going to cause more harm by having the lockdown than lives saved. That's what I'm saying. Why don't you give me the same courtesy that you want for yourself? Because they need to avoid that question. Because it's hard. It's easy to just be someone who has these simple answers. You see this on college campuses all the time. Like, look at feminism. Look at postmodernism. Look at cultural Marxism. Their life view is easy. You're an oppressor or you're oppressed. Period. That's simple. That's not science. That's not difficult. You look at two pictures. Which one of these persons is the good guy and which one's the bad? White guy oppressor, black guy oppressed. Boom, there. But wait a minute, don't you want to hear their background? Nope, that's that. Here's a man, here's a woman. One of them's bad, one of them's good. Woman good, man bad. Bam, that's it. That's how these people operate. So here it's either you're for the lockdown or you want people to die. We're not going to talk about economic concerns. We're not going to talk about the costs in human lives. We're not going to talk about the cost and quality of life. Nope, none of that matters. We're just talking about saving COVID patients. Now again, a brief sidebar. By having this one-size-fits-all lockdown, what they've actually done is centralize the deaths. Over 50% of deaths, almost state by state in the United States, occur in nursing homes. So if we would have done what I suggested and was focus our resources to the most vulnerable population and let the rest of us go back to work, not only would we have more resources because we're not wasting it on doing things like policing salon owners that are opening up, but the economy would still be humming, which would mean we would have more total resources to be able to put in these hospitals. Instead, we're furloughing workers at hospitals during a pandemic. Does that make sense? As a direct result of this, for example, I was talking about this the other day. I did a story where Pennsylvania, for example, we have nursing home workers talking about how they were told not to take patients with COVID to nursing homes, to hospitals, because they need the hospitals to be pristine. So basically they're signing a death warrant. Hey, sorry, you with COVID, you got to stay in the nursing home and infect the other people at the nursing home because we need our hospitals to be clean. Oh, and by the way, don't worry, Medicare quadrupled the amount of pay nursing homes get for COVID patients. So now they have an incentive to keep the patients as well. But hey, those lives need to be sacrificed. That's moral. That's legitimate. I'm the monster concerned about the lockdown, so that means I want people to die. Nonetheless, we have to have an evaluation of the cost benefit. So not just the cost of how much economically, but how many lives will be saved. And this is one of those fundamental questions I said needed to be answered before we acknowledge that our rights should be taken away or that the economy should be collapsed. Where's the proof of how many lives would be saved? The Imperial College? That's it? For example, I believe it's like almost 1% of the country dies every year. It's like over 3 million. This is a tough thing to say, and every death's tragic, and if it's your loved one, it doesn't matter if it's a car wreck, an overdose, pneumonia, COVID, the flu. It's tragic. I get that. I'm not belittling any death. But we have to be realistic. We can't shut down like Biden says, not one death. Okay, so what? Everybody lock themselves in home because as soon as you leave your door, your chances of dying go up? Not one death, so everyone perpetually stay in your home. Of course not. Again, the example I use all the time and I use in that video is, if that's the case, if we're willing to say we need to do everything possible to stop deaths, we know for a fact that if we lowered the speed limit to 5 miles an hour across the country, it would significantly cut back on the amount of people that died in automobile accidents, almost eliminate it. Are people willing to do that? You willing to give up that quality of life to do that? No, we all just implicitly accept there is a risk for this convenience. And not only that, lives are saved, not just improved, but saved because we have traveling in automobiles and we accept that risk. If we said not one life that could be prevented should be allowed to die, then we would eliminate vehicles or we would lower the speed limit to 5 miles an hour. Yet no one's willing to do that. So we had to look at seriously, if we have 3 million people a year dying, how many more would COVID kill? Let's say we take that 2.2 million ridiculous number. How many of those 2.2 million would have been people that would have died of other diseases on an average year? Because it's affecting people. Almost everyone that dies is someone who's already has pre-existing conditions and was already in a bad position. So what if 1 million of those 2.2 million would have died of some other disease anyways? Then we've only actually seen an increase in 1 million deaths. But the other side just wants to say, oh, so you're okay with the 1 million deaths? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to try to come up with an honest cost benefit. Now, instead of weighing 2.2 million deaths versus how many people will die because of the lockdown, now we're weighing 1 million deaths. But it's worse than that, because not only are there those type of questions, let me read you a number from the Imperial College head, Neil Ferguson, that you probably haven't heard. On March 20th, and this is from a New York Times author, on March 20th, the Imperial College lead author Neil Ferguson reported that 2.2 million death projection to the New York Times' Nicholas Kristof as a worst-case scenario. When Kristof queried him further for a best-case scenario, Ferguson answered 1.1 million deaths. Did you hear that? All of this talk about needing to save 2 million lives, yeah, that's garbage. According to their model, the best case scenario is 1.1 million deaths. So when they were advocating for the lockdown, they're like, we could save 1 million lives. 1 million people will still die. Now we know that number's garbage now. We know it's because they've adjusted it. They didn't say, he said best case scenario, not, hey, the way things are going now. He said best case scenario, 1.1 million deaths. Now they've adjusted their numbers to like 80,000. How is that possible if this model's accurate? They say, oh, well, we took new things into factor. But you said, wouldn't the best case scenario have taken in the policies that we've enacted and possibly more? Again, that's a number. They're pushing the 2.2 million, the worst case. They push that, but they ignore the best case scenario because that doesn't encourage the fear mongering. People will say, well, geez, for 1 million lives, many, maybe half of which would have died anyways, maybe it's not worth collapsing the economy and taking away our rights. No, that's no good. We have to get that fear mongering in there. Let's see if there's anything else. Then there are other problems. The Imperial College model itself is based on data that came from Italy and China. Let me get to that part. From the Imperial College study. Disentangling the relative effectiveness of different interventions from the experience of countries to date is challenging because many have implemented multiple or all of these measures with varying degrees of success. Through the hospitalization of all cases, not just those requiring hospital care, China, in effect, initiated a form of case isolation, reducing onward transmission from cases in the household and other settings. At the same time, by implementing population-wide social distancing, the opportunity for onward transmission in all locations was rapidly reduced. Several studies have estimated that these interventions reduced R to below 1 to the 15th. In recent days, these measures have begun to be relaxed. Close monitoring of the situation in China in the coming weeks will begin to inform strategies of other countries. One, isn't that interesting that Neil Ferguson and the Imperial College praised the Chinese model? Yep, those Chinese did a good job. Welding people in their homes, disappearing people that were sick. Good job. If only the United States could be more like that. But aside from that, he talks about how these type of lockdowns were successful. And what's the data set that he's using? The numbers coming out of China. So when they predict that these lockdowns will be able to save so many lives, they're basing that off the fact that the lockdown saved so many lives in China. Only one problem with that. It's now known by almost everyone, including the experts that we have to listen to, that China fudged the numbers. They grossly downplayed how many people died. Therefore, that would directly lead to a gross exaggeration of how effective a lockdown would be. Yet no one questions it. Trump's still touting the 2.2 million dead number. He's still criticizing Sweden for not locking down. Right, 250,000 dead now. Less than last year's flu, absolutely, by a large amount. That's how many are dead worldwide. Now, here's another thing that the Imperial College study says, right? One of the main criticisms I had was we were told we had to lock down the UK and the US, but they didn't tell us how long. Again, because we let them take away our rights initially without forcing them to answer questions, that means along every step of the way, they'll just do whatever they want. They'll change the rules day to day. They say it's this apocalyptic virus and only essential people should be allowed to work, but the liquor stores are open. Or not in my state, but the candy store's open in my town. Some people can't go to their jobs. The landscaping place is open. Can't go to church. Can go get liquor. How is this possible? Trump says, liberate Michigan, but Georgia's bad for opening up. What is up with these mixed messages? My governor of Pennsylvania, Democratic Governor Wolf, he went through, in a month's period, this is the steps he went through. One, we'll talk county by county and talk to the leaders of county, see how many confirmed cases they have, and then use that to implement a county by county strategy on lockdown. To a week later, nope, it's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach for all of Pennsylvania and every county. To then a week later, or 2 weeks later, saying, when asked a question, why can't business owners in counties that some counties have had zero COVID cases, why can't they open up? And his team said, well, because asymptomatic people there already have the virus, and so if we open up, it'll spread. To 3 days later saying, guess what? We're going to open up some of these counties. How does he change so far? Where did the science change? To go all the way from county to county to no, county to county is the worst thing. It would spread the virus. We need one size fits all. To then 2 days later saying, oh, nope, we're back to county. What changed? That's one of the things. It's not just that they took our rights away, which is bad enough. It's that because we didn't force them to answer these questions, now they're winging it. Well, whatever we feel like today. Oh, will people protest today? Yeah, we'll lighten up a little today. But then we'll fudge the numbers a little, which happened in Pennsylvania. 11%, they inflated the numbers. Local coroners in counties in the center of the state had to come out and say, no, we didn't sign off on these COVID deaths. And then Tom Wolf's office said, our bad, sorry, we accidentally inflated it by 200. That happened. So they just scaremonger. They get away with what they can. Some people push back. They let up a little, then they push back. So one of the things that we should have asked initially was, how can we prove that this lockdown will save lives? And how long must the lockdown last? Now, we've been given mixed messages, both in the UK and the US. Trump said maybe by Easter, which, okay, maybe he's just being optimistic, but certainly it was in the realm of a month or two. We've heard people, everything from a month or two to 2 years to, and we have to, Foki said, until not one new case comes, until there's a vaccine. We've heard all of this. So if we're basing the lockdown being successful on this Imperial College model, which is what we did, that's why we had the lockdowns, what do they suggest about the lockdowns and how they could be most effective? Let's see what they say. From the Imperial College study, to avoid a rebound in transmission, these policies will need to be maintained until large stocks of vaccines are available to immunize the population, which could be 18 months or more. Now, instead of telling the population, look, here's our options. We do a lockdown, but if the lockdown's going to work, it has to be basically a total lockdown, and it's going to be at least 18 months. Or we could try other measures and millions of people may die. Now, that's a difficult choice. Now, granted, the model was wrong about the millions of people dying, but okay, at least that would be a choice I think people would have liked to know. You're going to have to be shut down for 18 months. But they lied to us. They didn't push that out. Now, the 2.2 million dead number that the Imperial College people knew was an impossible number, they pushed that every time they could, but they didn't push the lockdown will need to be 18 months. Didn't push that as much. Didn't push, and that'll only save 1 million people. Didn't push that much, did they? Let me see. And then the last thing I talk about is the nail in the coffin. Sweden. I've been making this argument, I don't know how long now, which was, look, one of the things they try to do is say, oh, you can't compare country to country. That's exactly what the Imperial College model did. It took data from China and Italy, so it was using their countries and saying it was an analogous situation to what we could compare the UK and US to by tweaking some numbers, and they made their predictions based on that. So why wouldn't I be able to then look at Sweden? they'll say, well, the healthcare system's different, the demographics are different, blah, 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 blah. Okay, but even that would only cover a small discrepancy in the data. Maybe only half as many people, and that's being generous. Half as many people per capita may have died in Sweden because their situation's just better than the UK. So half as many people. But a lockdown that they're saying will save 25 times the amount of people in the United States and the UK. Because remember, the Imperial College said 500,000 dead in the UK, but if you do the lockdowns, only 20,000 dead. That's 25 times the amount of people will die without a lockdown. So that would also apply to Sweden. Maybe not that exact number, 25 times, but it would be a catastrophe without the lockdown and incredibly mitigated with a lockdown. That would remain true. If it's true in the UK, it would remain true in Sweden. Yet to this day, we see per capita the numbers are as follows. The UK had a huge lockdown. Sweden went the way of not having a lockdown. Let me try to bring it up for you. Oh, wait. Sorry about that. All right, so we would expect, based on the fact that the UK locked down and Sweden didn't, that Sweden's per capita number of deaths is going to be way higher, at least 4 or 5 times higher than the UK's. They didn't lock down. That's a catastrophe. That's what the model that we used told us. Here's the United Kingdom. 4th worst in the world at deaths per million. 452.35 deaths per million. 4th worst in the world with the most significant lockdown. Where's Sweden? Sweden, without the lockdown, 288 deaths per million. That's a 60% increase in deaths per million per capita for the UK that did lockdown versus Sweden that didn't lockdown. Again, the magnitude that they suggested, 25 times more people would die in the UK without a lockdown. 25 times more. That would surely correlate at least some to Sweden, but it's not at all. It's the exact opposite that you would expect. So I've been saying, don't let them get away with saying, but you can't compare one country to the other, because the magnitude, it wasn't just that they said, we'll do the lockdown. If the lockdown, we'll be able to save 20% of people. They said 25 times more people will be able to save with the lockdowns. That's what they said. That magnitude's so great that it would overwhelm any demographic differences. So I kept saying that. Unfortunately, no one wants to listen to me. I'm not an expert, so I found an expert. First off, you need to know that, did you know that? I didn't know this. It was never peer-reviewed. The Imperial College model was never peer-reviewed. 6 weeks it took them to release the code. Let me read what it says. Put another way, they released a heavily reorganized and generic file that would permit others to run their own version of the COVID model. They do not appear to have released the actual version they ran in the March 16th paper that helped shape the US and UK government policies, or the results that came from that model, a distinction that was immediately noticed by GitHub users. As of this writing, the data needed to fully scrutinize the model and results behind the March 16th paper remains elusive. There may be another way, though, to see how the projections are performing under pressure. So they didn't peer review. Then 6 weeks later, they released their source code so scientists could redo the experiment and make sure that it was accurate. And they didn't even release the exact source code. So it still hasn't been peer reviewed. Yet, even without any peer review, that's the model we use to have these lockdowns. Now, the same people that endorse that, the exact same people, will look at the Santa Clara study that showed the mortality rates way down and way more people had the virus asymptomatically than we thought, and the New York Times, the New York City numbers, and the Florida numbers, and the Germany numbers. Every single time we test random people instead of just people, or at least a more random sampling, instead of just people that think they have COVID and are going to the hospital, every single time we find out a whole bunch of people had it that didn't have symptoms. And what that does is it lowers the mortality rate. Instead, we have to pretend that it's a 4% mortality rate, and everybody knows that's garbage. And we're told, well, those studies weren't peer-reviewed, so we can't trust them. So instead, we trust the model that was also not peer-reviewed? The article continues. Although the Imperial College only released scenarios for the associated forecast for the United Kingdom and the United States, its model is theoretically adaptable to any country by changing the inputs to reflect its population, demographics, and the date and its specific policies took effect. In other words, you take the exact same system that they had, you change things like the population, healthcare access, the time that policies were implemented, and it will give you a prediction that would have been the same prediction. You could use their model for any country. If the model's accurate for the US and the UK, it would be accurate for all these other countries. In early April, around the peak of the academic community's backlash against Sweden government's strategy, a group of researchers at Uppsala University attempted to do just that. They released an epidemiological model for Sweden that adapted the Imperial College COVID-19 model from Ferguson and his colleagues and attempted to project the effects of Sweden's unique response on both hospital capacity and total fatalities. The Uppsala team's presentation appears to closely follow the Imperial College approach. They presumed a projection for an unmitigated response, also known as the do-nothing response, then modeled the predicted effects of the variety of policy intervention. These included staying the course on the government's alternative approach of remaining open with milder social distancing guidelines, as well as implementing varying degrees of lockdown. The model stressed its own urgency as well. Sweden would have to adopt a lockdown policy similar to the rest of Europe immediately if it wished to avoid catastrophe. So these people doing the study actually are like, oh my God, COVID's terrible. We need to avoid catastrophe. So this isn't a bunch of right-wingers that are like, I'm skeptical of the Imperial College. They assumed this study was correct. And they said, what will it show us about our country? As the authors explained, under conservative estimates using their model, the current Swedish public health strategy will result in a peak intensive care load in May that exceeds pre-pandemic capacity over 40-fold, with a median mortality of 96,000 people by June. You get that? If Sweden stayed the course and didn't do the lockdowns, 96,000 people would be dead by June. That's what the Imperial College model says when adapted to Sweden. Their proposed mitigation scenarios, which followed lockdown strategies similar to those recommended in the Imperial College paper and adopted elsewhere in Europe, were predicted to reduce mortality by approximately threefold, while also averting a catastrophic failure of the healthcare system. The authors of the paper expressed sincere concern for limiting the damage done by genuinely horrendous disease, and they released their study in hope that it would better inform the policy response. Its predictions have already failed to play out, though, and badly failed at that. The Swedish model laid out its predicted death and hospitalization rates for competing policy scenarios in a series of graphs. You ready for this? Not you, Siri. Go away, Siri. You ready? According to their projections, this is taking the Imperial College model and inserting the numbers for Sweden in it. So what's the Imperial College model predict for Sweden? The current Swedish government's response, if permitted to continue, would pass 40,000 deaths by May 1st, 2020. We're at May 7th, 2020. 40,000 predicted to be dead by the Imperial College model. That's their model. 40,000 predicted dead. How many died? You ready? 2,941. 13 times fewer than what the model predicted. That is the death knell for the Imperial College study. Because their only hope was they were able to say, and I had people say this, that pushed this model, they said, well, we'll never know if the 2.2 million number was accurate or not because we did the lockdown. And now the number's changed because the lockdown's been, the reason we don't have millions of deaths because the lockdown worked. But how can we prove that? It's non-falsifiable. Well, what you can do is take that model to a country that didn't do the lockdown and see if the numbers hold up. And it's not like they're a little off. It's almost completely off. Like the rest of Ferguson's predictions, where he predicted millions would die and only hundreds died. It continues. It would rise to 100,000 deaths by June. Better pick up. We're at 2,900. The most severe of the lockdown strategies they considered was supposed to cut that number to between 10 and 20,000 by May 1st. So if we would have had the lockdowns, they said still 10 to 20,000 people would die. Instead, no lockdowns and far fewer people died. 2,900 died. That is a complete and utter failure of this model. End of story. Now, what they'll say, this is what the people, well, you can't compare one country to, and the scientists working on at the Imperial College were different than Ferguson. So even, you could damn bet though, if they would have used Ferguson's model and it would have came out, it would have been 40,000 would have died. You'd think that for a second, these people wouldn't say, see, when they applied to a non-lockdown country, it worked. The Imperial College model predicted 40,000 dead Swedes, and that's how many died. You're damn sure they would have said that. But now all of a sudden it'll be, oh, no, we can't trust applying it to Sweden. It doesn't work that way. But even intuitively, as just a layman, you know that makes sense. If you were told 500,000 people died without a lockdown, only 20,000 died with the lockdown, then you go to a country just a little across the way. They didn't lock down. Oh, shit, a bunch of people are going to die. Oh, what's that? Less per capita died than the country that locked down? Geez, maybe that catastrophic prediction made by the guy who 5 times previously issued catastrophic predictions and each of those 5 times was wrong. Maybe this one's wrong too. Anyways, so that's what that video is about. I would appreciate if you guys can, either... Well, if you could share that video, it's 45 minutes, but it basically just goes over what I just did. And I think that's important. I haven't seen other people break it down that way. I have a limited audience. I understand I made a lot of people mad because I criticized Trump. Trump is still saying Sweden made a huge mistake. So I'm sorry, I don't buy this argument. Oh, he secretly wants to end the lockdown. Then why is he criticizing Georgia and Sweden? I don't buy it. This was a sham. What's done is done. The greatest damage is already done. The economy's screwed. We've set the precedent that people will accept the taking away of their rights based on any fear-mongering, no matter how little evidence there is for it. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop right now and try to redirect the ship. It's time to end the lockdown immediately. Instead, we're hearing fear-mongering. Florida lifted the lockdown. Very first day, they're like, Florida deaths spike after the lockdown lifted. Despite the fact that it has what? A 12-day incubation period? 2-week incubation period? So even if the lifting of the lockdown would have caused more deaths, we wouldn't know for 2 to 3 weeks. But that didn't stop the media from propagandizing it. Meanwhile, we have reports that up to 9 million additional people throughout the world could starve to death because of the lockdowns. 1.5 million dead of tuberculosis because of it. Reports of suicides going up, people not getting treatments for things like cancer and other serious treatments in some areas. But we have to just ignore all of that. 30 million people lost their jobs. 30 million in the United States. We can't afford it. Hospitals furloughing employees in a pandemic because no one's going to the hospital because the pandemic was nowhere near as bad as what they suggested. Purposely inflating COVID numbers over and over. We have people from the CDC telling us masks don't help. Now we have laws in Pennsylvania, at least in other states, saying you have to have a mask on to go out. The CDC came out today and said, what did they say? They said, look, we're recommending mail-in voting in November. Every single policy that Trump has endorsed and the Republicans have endorsed and signed off on in response to this virus, every single one was one of the dreams of the Democrats. It's the Green New Deal. Massive wealth redistribution, destruction of the middle class, massive adding people to dependency on the government. You hear them saying now, oh, this came out yesterday, doctors saying, you know what populations are social distancing best? It's immigrants, illegal immigrants. White people are the problem. That's some things that you've heard. That's what we're dealing with. The Republic, why would, and again, and I know I'm repeating myself from videos I've done in the past, but it is not leadership for these Republicans. Just ask yourself, what have they done if you voted for a Republican? What have they done? Were they out there on the front lines when our rights were being taken away saying this is wrong? If they were, how vocal were they? Because I didn't hear hardly anyone. Why is some fat guy like me doing a better job than them? Or are they just saying, oh, those Democrats are terrible. They're holding back small business loans. We can't stay locked down forever. Yeah, those are all great talking points. But you know what the real answer was? If you were a leader, you would have been against the lockdown from the get-go. You would have said, no. I'm not taking my constituents' rights away until I have proof that it's necessary, beyond any reasonable doubt. And instead, we find out that not only wasn't there proof, but it was wrong. The models that they relied on were wrong. Right, of course, it's like a false fight. And I've been predicting, again, I'm not going to claim that I predicted it would be a pandemic, but I've been urging Republicans and Trump supporters to stop being so arrogant for 6 months now, saying Trump's got it locked up, he's going to crush whoever the Democrat is, none of them could hold a candle to him, he's going to win 48 states. I said never underestimate the corruption of the establishment. They're going to bring people out of the woodwork to accuse Trump of all kinds of sexual crimes. They're going to intentionally collapse the economy. Now, I'm not saying the virus isn't real. And I'm not saying, the Democrats created the virus or had something. I'm not saying any of that. The virus is real. Absolutely. I think the numbers are being inflated. I don't trust them. I think that the severity of the virus is being blown out of proportion. But no doubt it's a real virus. No doubt. People are dying of something out there. Maybe not as many as they're saying, but it's out there. But this is certainly, just like every crisis we've seen in the past, it will be exploited by power-hungry people that want more power for themselves. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And that's what some of my anger for Trump comes in, where he's falling right into their trap. For better or worse, if you're an average person that doesn't follow politics and you lost your livelihood, who are you going to blame? If you really don't follow things, chances are you're going to blame whoever you perceive as the leader. So your governor, your president. Is that fair? No. But that's the way it works. It's not leadership all of a sudden for Republicans to be looking and say, what's the polling numbers? Oh, now people are against the lockdown? Okay, then I'm against the lockdown. I was against the lockdown and I lost tons of subscribers, and I had people tell me I was an immoral person, and I had Trump supporters telling me to go to hell because I didn't support Trump on this when it wasn't popular. So whether it be your politician or whoever you're watching on YouTube or your media person that you're watching the mainstream media or the newspaper you're reading, when it really mattered, when your rights were being taken away in a way that I've never seen in my lifetime, and it wasn't popular to say, wait a minute, we shouldn't allow this taking away of our rights. Who said that when it was unpopular versus who was silent or who was against it, but then changed their tune once they perceived that as being the popular thing to say? That's all I'll say on it. So, all right, I've been rambling long enough. You wouldn't believe. I'm doing a video with Sarah Courier tonight. So stay tuned for that, hopefully. She didn't text me yet, but yeah, if I find out more about that, I'll let you know. I might take tomorrow off because I've been doing a lot of material, but if you're someone who supports me on Patreon or who's given me money in the past, I hope that this week showed, I am really, really trying, now that my work schedule is cut back because I do home health care, and because of the nature of this, it's difficult finding healthy people. And I don't mean because the COVID's so bad. I just mean people are taking off. People don't want to come to work because of fears of COVID. So it's tough to find bodies to do. It's tough to find bodies to get in there to work. So I've been working crazy amounts of overtime. So I'm trying to get back in now that I'm back on a more normal schedule to putting out material. So yeah. Truth Seeker says, do I got some time today? I don't know. I got to get a hold of Sarah because I made a prior commitment to her that I would do her show tonight. and we're going to try to start doing a weekly show. I don't know exactly what time that is, but I will do a video letting you all know, a link to that video if it happens tonight and what time it'll be. So I don't know exactly what time. I have to, my wife gets off work at 5:30. I have to start dinner before that. I don't know if Sarah's thing will be at like 7 or something like that. So I can't, unfortunately, True Seeker, I can't say that I definitely have time today. But if you email me, it's rob.nor@gmail.com. I'll try to get back to you if I have the time. I really will. And that goes for anyone else as well. But I do really appreciate the people that want to talk to me and you people that stuck around. And I hope that I'm showing that I'm retold. I'm happy. I think that we got shellacked by the globalists. They took away our rights. So many people went along with it. That's okay. I'll take my loss and I'm going to start fighting again for it. So I'm here. I'm going to try to keep putting this stuff out. I'm going to try to get better in multiple ways and do more for y'all. So thank you all for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. I do. So, all right, everyone. Thanks so much. I'm going to go try to get dinner ready. I'm sure it'll be terrible if I'm in charge of it, but we'll try anyways. Thank you so much. Look forward to me being on Sarah's channel later tonight. If you check my channel out, if that happens, I'll put a video up here first directing you to her site. So thanks so much, everyone. Consider sharing that 45-minute video I did. Thank you so much, and have a good one.